Good evening, I'm Ann Medina, and welcome to the 1997 Leaders Debate, coming to you live from the Government Conference Centre here in Ottawa. There are 5 party leaders participating tonight. They are Jean Chrétien, leader of the Liberal Party, Jean Charest, leader of the Progressive Conservative Party, Preston Manning, leader of the Reform Party, Alexa McDonough, leader of the New Democratic Party, and Gilles Duceppe, leader of the Bloc Québécois. Tonight, these 5 leaders will be giving opening and closing statements. They will be answering questions from a panel of journalists and from an audience, and most importantly, they will be debating each other. The main part of the evening will be divided into 5 sections, with each section devoted to a particular theme. The journalists will introduce the 5 themes, the leaders will then debate the topic, and finally, in each section, members of our audience will ask their own questions. A note about the debates. The parties have agreed that the debating sections would be best served if they were as unrestricted as possible. My role, therefore, will not be to intervene with a stopwatch. However, in the interests of fairness and balance, I've been asked to intervene in the following situations. If a leader has been trying for a period of time to make a point or to respond to a criticism and has been unable to do so, and if the discussion becomes such that no one can hear or understand what's being said. So those are the rules, and that's the format that have been agreed to by all 5 parties. Also, for your information, whenever the leaders are given a time limit, a light signals to them when they have 30 seconds remaining, when they have 10 seconds left, and when their time is up. I do hope they'll honor it. I hate to interrupt, but that's my assigned task if they tiptoe over the line. Finally, in every case where there is an order of appearance, a drawing has been held. So that gives you a sense of what's coming up tonight. Now, let's begin with the opening statements. Alexa McDonough, leader of the New Democratic Party, will go first.
Thank you very much for tuning in. Tonight you are about to hear 2 very different visions for Canada's future. On this side, the 3 gentlemen on my right have all supported huge cuts to education, to health care, and to other important national programs. By their actions, they have shown that jobs are not the priority. These views have dominated Parliament since 1993, and it's been a very lopsided debate, with the Bloc pursuing its own narrow, destructive agenda and ignoring the real issues. I'm here tonight to say it doesn't have to be that way. There is a better way. We all want to balance the budget, but New Democrats want to balance the budget at a much lower level of unemployment. Politics is about choices, and if the government can set and meet targets to reduce the deficit, they can darn well set and meet targets to cut unemployment in half. We're fighting to protect education for our children, health care for our families, security for seniors, instead of big tax breaks and more tax cuts for banks, big corporations, and the wealthy. We should reward businesses that create jobs, but we have to stop the giveaways to those who don't. We have to protect our environment and our culture for the benefit of all of us. But above all else, we have to provide hope for Canadians. So tonight, let's talk about choices, opportunities, and about hope.
Jean Chrétien, leader of the Liberal Party.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. This election is about choices, values, and priorities for the Canada of the 21st century. This is the time to debate ideas. This is what democracy is all about. We have set out very clearly our choices. An economy that creates jobs through a balanced budget and low interest rates, preserving and modernizing health care, investing in children, particularly poor children, investing in knowledge, innovation, education, technology and trade, and strengthening the unity of Canada. In 1993, we start off with a $42 billion deficit. Our economy was in decline, and hope for the future was very low. Soon, we will have a balanced budget. This is not just the accomplishment of a government. It is the accomplishment of the Canadian people. Now is our chance, as a country, to build on that success. We have put forward a plan that is responsible, balanced, practical, fair, and moderate, in keeping with the values of Canadians. And we appeal to what unites Canadians, not what divides us. The unity of our country is a very precious thing, too important to play dangerous games with. We must always appeal to the best in people, and I welcome the chance to speak to Canadians tonight about securing our future together. Thank you.
Preston Manning, leader of the Reform Party.
Well, good evening, Canadians, and thank you for joining us. Tonight you will hear from the various federal political parties their positions on key issues of importance to you: jobs, taxes, crime, social safety nets, unity, accountability. But what I hope you will also see emerge is two very different views on the role of the federal government. The old view, represented by the traditional parties, the old parties, sees a big, high-spending federal government as the primary source of jobs and social security. It's a view that is not working, that has resulted in high taxes, in high unemployment, in high debt, and high anxiety levels. A new vision will be presented by Reform that replaces the big, expensive government with a smaller and more focused government that leaves more dollars in your pockets and that sees government as having its primary purpose in supporting you, your family, and your community. The old line parties also believe that the way to keep Canada together, and we have to think about how to keep Canada together, is to grant special status to some Canadians, including distinct society status for the province of Quebec. Reform believes that the key to unity is to treat all citizens and provinces equally. And tonight I hope to show you how you can achieve both unity and diversity by using that formula. At the end of this debate, I will challenge you to make a choice. Do you want more of the same? A big government, high taxes, special status approach to unity? Or do you want a fresh start, smaller government, lower taxes, and equality for all citizens and provinces? The choice is yours. Thank you.
Gilles Duceppe, leader of the Bloc Québécois.
Dear friends, in October 1993, Quebecers decided to send a strong contingent of sovereignist MPs to Ottawa. They decided to give themselves a voice in the House of Commons, a voice which would speak for all Quebecers and for Quebec. In fact, the Bloc has been and continues to be a strong voice with ideas like job creation strategy and its proposals for fighting poverty. But just as importantly, by electing the Bloc, the Quebec people stated clearly its conviction that it is impossible to reform Canada in its interest. For many years, Quebecers have claimed more powers for the government in Quebec City. We now know that this is no longer feasible. More and more Quebecers are convinced that the only solution is the sovereignty of Quebec and a new partnership with Canada. We propose a constructive project, not a destructive one. A project which will allow Canadians and Quebecers to build two countries on a basis of an equal partnership. For the Bloc Québécois, sovereignty is a certainty. It is the normal progression of a people towards its full affirmation. We are closer than ever to our goal, and I firmly believe that sovereignist support will come out on top in the next referendum. I sincerely hope that both Quebecers and Canadians will prepare for this event serenely and in the respect of our democratic values. Thank you.
And Jean Charest, leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Good evening. Tonight is an important opportunity for you to compare leaders and plans and decide which one can help you best achieve your goals. The quality of leadership matters. The right kind of leadership can help you improve your future. Without it, government can make us all lose ground. In the last election campaign, our party received a message loud and clear. Since then, I've been listening, learning, working hard to offer Canadians a national alternative. I'm offering a new plan for our future, one which is focused, frugal, and will work. How will it help? Our plan will cut taxes right away. If you are working hard, you deserve a higher standard of living, not bigger taxes. If you're looking for work, you deserve a government determined to find new ways to help. High taxes kill jobs. Lower taxes will help create more jobs. This country can afford to cut taxes now. We can and should make this choice. Our plan will help provide a bold new health care guarantee. Federal cuts have created chaos in our health care system. We've got to change direction and restore peace of mind. Finally, I want to be Prime Minister to build a new coalition of Canadians, a coalition ready to move forward together. So whether you live in Calgary, in Chicoutimi, or come by chance, I also want us to make this country work. I want us, and Canadians are looking for leadership that will make Canada work. This is a choice we can and must make. Thank you.
Thank you all. We now turn to the 5 various themes of the evening to be introduced through questions from our panel of journalists. And they are Jason Moskowitz from CBC News, Craig Oliver from CTV News, and Peter Kent from Global Television. In each section, a journalist will ask one of the leaders an initial question on a given theme, and the other 4 leaders will also give a timed response. The journalist will then ask that same leader a second question, and after a brief answer, the other leaders will be free to jump in and the debate begins. The first theme to be debated is jobs, and I'll ask Peter Kent to address the first question to Preston Manning.
Good evening. Well, the jobs issue is a key part of every election campaign, but there's no doubt that this time it is issue 1. Canadians without jobs and very little prospect of employment are angry and desperate. Those who do have jobs, many of them underemployed, are insecure and anxious. Given the skepticism, even cynicism among voters that any of you can create large numbers of meaningful new jobs, what is your program, Mr. Manning?
I think the key to your question is you say, we create jobs, or can we create jobs? And I think what we have here is a big choice between 2 alternative approaches as to how jobs are created. The conventional thinking in Ottawa, it's been espoused by the 3 traditional parties for a long time, is that big governments can create jobs. That they take money from taxpayers, they take it to Ottawa, they take an administrative bite out of it, and they spend it on so-called job creation. What that's done is give us 1.4 million unemployed, underemployed, many people concerned about jobs. The other alternative is to leave more dollars in the pockets of taxpayers to spend, consumers to spend, and businesses to invest. And we think it's about high time we tried that alternative approach. So we have this fresh start approach on jobs that balances the federal budget first and then delivers broad-based tax relief, about $15 billion per year in tax relief by the year 2000. It creates more jobs, if you run it through the big computers that we use to measure these things, than anything that's been proposed by the government.
Thank you,
or by
Mr.
Mr.
Manning.
Charest.
Alexa McDonough.
Well, first of all, we have to set and meet targets to reduce jobs the same way we have set and met targets to reduce the deficit. I mean, we haven't done that. We haven't seen that kind of concentrated approach for 3.5 years with this government. We've got to recommit to education and to research and development. We've got to reinvest in the economy. You can't shrink your way to prosperity. And that means that the public sector has to stop the cuts, because they've already, with their first round of cuts, eliminated 400,000 jobs. And it means we have to get the private sector investing again as well. It means we have to get banks to reinvest in the communities where people have entrusted their deposits to those banks. And it means we have to rebalance work opportunities between the overworked and the unemployed. A third of the workforce not able to get into the workforce at all, and a third of people overworked, killing their own health, killing their family life, killing their opportunity to participate in the community. Surely it's a failure of leadership not to tackle this issue.
Gilles Duceppe.
We're proposing an 8-point strategy to create employment. to modify the tax corporate system to be able to recover $3 billion to be used to encourage businesses to create jobs. Also to decrease the unemployment insurance premiums by 35 cents. We're also asking the government to focus on the unemployment in the economic sector where the presence of the federal government has a significant influence. Also the creation of an RRSP employment program, because we're facing more and more autonomous workers, and we want them to be able to use that money in the RRSP to create their own jobs. More and more people are facing that situation of unemployment and are creating their own job. And we wanted also all the return all the manpowers into the hands of provinces, because even with the agreement signed with Quebec, there's still a $500 million in Ottawa that should be returned to Quebec and to other provinces also.
Thank you, Jean Chrétien.
Our objective must be that every Canadian who wants to work can find a job. When I became Prime Minister, the country was almost bankrupt. We had $42 billion deficit, and the deficit was killing jobs. So we had to put order in the situation. And the Canadians made great efforts, and today we have a biojet that will be in soon balance, and that has created low interest rates, and low interest rates help investment and help people who are buying housing and cars and so on. And we have been working very hard to export the Canadian goods and services abroad through Team Canada. And today we realize that in the last 2 months, 93,000 jobs have been created. We are on the right track. We have to make sure that the people pull together. It's not easy, but if we maintain what we're doing, that will create jobs, because these are the things needed, an economy that can compete with anybody in the world.
And Jean Charest.
Thank you. Well, ladies and gentlemen, here's an area where the broken promises of the Liberal government hurts Canadians the most. The truth of the matter is we're experiencing today the highest period of high unemployment we've had since the 1930s. Youth unemployment's at a record level. In fact, there were, 72,000 jobs lost for 15 to 24 years old in the last year. Yet, we have parents who have kids at home who have diplomas and don't have a job or a prospect of a job. And this government seems to have thrown in the towel. In fact, there's worse than that. They're imposing a $5 billion tax on jobs through the employment insurance system. There are 4 things I want to do for the country. A, cut taxes, payroll taxes, to reduce the cost of creating a job. Reduce personal income taxes so that we can afford more consumption. Canadians can go out and spend. Secondly, I want to bring down interprovincial trade barriers. 3, a stronger emphasis in national leadership on education and training. 5, eliminate the regulatory burden. These 5 things, these areas of concern, will help us create more jobs in our economy.
Peter?
Mr. Manning, you contend that government has little, if any, role in direct job creation, but what about those profitable Canadian companies, some with consecutive record profits, that are still eliminating jobs? How would you deal with them?
Well, I think you want your tax relief to go in the areas where it'll generate the most jobs, and where that will go is you give tax relief to consumers. And our Fresh Start platform delivers a great deal of tax relief to consumers to spend, and also the lower and medium-sized businesses who, when they invest, do create jobs. And if you target your tax relief in the proper area, you can increase your job stimulus. I think the issue that's going to have to be dealt here with, though, and I challenge Mr. Chrétien on this, I mean, your record is, you made this promise last time of jobs, 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 and we have the 1.4 million unemployed. These are not just statistics. These are real people, dashed hopes, dashed dreams. And I do not see, from what I've heard you say in the House of Commons, that you have an understanding of how a job is actually created in a modern economy. And I think you owe it to Canadians to tell them, how do you see a job created in today's economy? Because we happen to need a couple of million of them.
But for me, in the House of Commons, we debated a lot and we always said that what was important was to have the fundamental rights. We inherited a huge deficit. In the last 5 years of the Tory administration, they created 120,000 jobs. In the last 3 years and 7 months, the Canadian economy has created 793,000 new
but
jobs.
I'm asking, how does a job come into being? How does it get created? Does it get created through government infrastructure? How does it get created?
If there's one thing that's quite clear is that I do think the Prime Minister spent a lot of time in the House of Commons, but as we saw in the town hall meetings in December, I don't think the Prime Minister, Mr. Chrétien, realizes that there are a lot of Canadians suffering out there in Atlantic Canada and the West who don't have jobs. And in fact, he had choices to make. One of them was whether or not he'd use the employment insurance system for the purpose of reducing the deficit, rather than reducing program spending in Ottawa. He is now using, his government, the employment insurance system to the tune of $5 billion a year to offset the deficit. And that's the wrong choice, because that is the worst tax that you could impose on jobs in this country. With all respect, I would cut that tax immediately and reinvest the $5 million into the economy, allow Canadians to keep that money. That's the first positive thing that we could do that would create thousands of jobs for Canadians.
The reality is, Mr. Charest, that your
by
tax
cutting by
cuts
70 cents the premium, the unemployment insurance premiums, you don't have any space to give better conditions to all those workers unemployed. The number of people unemployed who had right to, or were eligible to unemployment insurance back in '93 was 62%. Now it's 34%. That's why we're proposing to decrease the premiums by 35 cents and using the other part, the $2.5 billion, to make better conditions for those on unemployment.
But Mr. Duceppe, let me just remind you that the money we're talking about is the money that's taken off the paychecks of workers every week. It's their money. It belongs to them. They earn it. They work for it. They deserve to keep that money, and that will reduce the cost of creating a job, which Mr. Chrétien refuses to do.
We'll have as many people on unemployment.
You ask us to consider that you've taken a balanced approach to jobs. 1.5 million Canadians unemployed when you were elected Prime Minister, 1.5 Canadians unemployed today. Is that your idea of balance?
You know, the Canadian economy has created 795,000 jobs in the last 3 years and 7 months. And, of course, there is more participation in the Canadian people, but we had to put orders from the mess that Mr. Charest and his friends left to us.
But we're talking about 1.5 million real people who need real jobs that need to feed their families.
But the starting point here,
it's not a question of statistics.
The question here is, like, how does a job get created? If the public thought we knew how a job was created, they'd have a better chance to judge which policy will get us there. And you got two options. Are jobs created by you spending money through infrastructure program? Is that the way? Or are jobs created by massive tax relief? Like, how does a job get created?
You know, the Prime Minister just said...
the infrastructure program, and everybody recognized that it was a great success. Every city, every provincial government decided to use it to improve the infrastructure of the government.
So if we had a bigger infrastructure program,
we had
that would
to
solve
put
the problem.
order in the finances of the nation. We had to eliminate the deficit that existed in the unemployment insurance fund that were left by us. He's talking about the premium. The Conservatives took the premium at $1.95 and increased it to January 1994 at $3.30. We have, in our balanced approach, reduced it to $2.90, and we have at the same time invested in some job creation. And in the meantime, because the interest rates are going down, the private sector is investing. People are buying, as I said earlier, and it's why these jobs are created. And we had Team Canada going around the world, selling goods and services.
Mr. Chrétien said a minute ago that the participation rate of Canadians was higher in the job market. That's not the case. The participation rate in '93 was 65.3 when he was elected. It's 64.8 right now. The fact of the matter is that Mr. Chrétien has thrown in the towel. And that's what I find despairing. As I travel throughout the country, Canadians know that, yes, government can play a role. It starts by getting out of the way. It can play a constructive role. And by returning this money to Canadians will allow them to invest it. But we can do better than that. We can bring down interprovincial trade barriers, assert national leadership. These trade barriers cost us money. They also cost us jobs. This government has not asserted that leadership. We can also assert national leadership in the area of education and training to make things happen.
So
but that's also part of
Mr. Charest, your tax cuts for the wealthy Your tax cuts for the wealthy and Mr. Manning's tax
national
cuts for the
standards
wealthy.
is something that Canadians can agree to.
So you want
in
national
healthcare,
standards in education field?
There can be agreed
You're more
to national
centralizing
standards.
than Mr. Chrétien now.
Now, what I'm happy to, if I can talk, I think that some people will have to like to spend money. Like the NDP, they always propose to spend money. Now this time we have not finished winning the war on the deficit. We are 2/3 to the way. We're getting into the third period. It's not the time to proclaim victory. So before we have a balanced budget, you, the Conservative Party and the Reform Party, are trying to buy votes in promising tax cuts that are premature. That's why I am in the middle, having the proper balance that create the proper climate that creates jobs.
You say we want to spend money. You want to spend $10 million on buying new art for the millennium. You want to spend. You spent $15 million on flags. You want to spend $2 million on a commissioner for aquaculture, and you're saying to us there's no manoeuvring room to reduce taxes. Let's be clear on one thing: there is the maneuvering room. What Mr. Chrétien wants to do is increase your spending.
Mr. Manning,
you have not mentioned tax relief. You've not mentioned tax relief as a major mechanism for stimulating jobs. It's one that your government doesn't even consider. Do you not believe that tax relief, after you've balanced the budget, will deliver you more jobs than anything you could do with those dollars?
First, we have to balance.
That's what we say.
Yeah. And after that, we say that when we'll be in a surplus position, half of the surplus will go to work to put money in economic and social program, but because there are problems of that nature in Canada.
Mr. Manning, your tax cuts for the wealthy.
And the other half, we say it will go for tax cuts or for debt reduction.
But that means if you believe that tax relief will create jobs, and jobs is your number one priority, you'd balance the budget faster to get to that goal. Does that not follow?
We have been so successful in doing that we are 1.5 years more advanced than we said in the last campaign that we were to do. And we are $10 billion in better position. But it's not the time to change the course, because this country is being praised by the IMF as the one that is doing the best in 1997.
Ms. McDonough had a point.
Mr. Manning, your tax cuts for the wealthy and Mr. Charest's tax cuts for the wealthy are paid for by everybody else. They're paid for in reduced services, and they're paid for in lost jobs. Look, it's not just NDP research. CIBC, Wood Gundy have said that as a result of cutting too far, too fast, we've eliminated 400,000
They also say we should
jobs.
cut taxes.
Decent jobs, well-paid jobs.
Bob Ray got thrown out of the government of Ontario because union people in Ontario said what Bob Ray gave us, he made us think of payday as tax day. He raised the taxes so high, he got himself
Mr. Manning, I have no doubt that you'd like to talk about some other election and some other politicians.
He followed the
We're
NDP
talking about
policy.
the plan
He
for
raised
jobs
the
in
taxes,
this election.
and he killed jobs.
And your tax breaks are paid for by everyone else. Look, your capital gains tax break is giving a $40,000 benefit to someone earning over $250,000. To a family of four earning $20,000, a crummy, measly, miserable $107 tax break. Is that your idea of fairness? Straight from your platform.
We need more equity in fiscality. And I can't accept that capital gains are taxed at a rate of 75%, while an employment income is taxed at 100%. And there's a lot of loopholes also, and the Minister of Finance knows that pretty well.
Where is this?
You have to make a statement.
And when you look at Mr. Charest,
I'd be happy to respond.
Someone who earns $60,000 a year will receive a 12.8 tax reduction. Someone who earns $30,000 a year will receive a 3.8 tax reduction.
Someone who earns $30,000
program made for the richest people of our society.
Let me give someone who earns $30,000 a year under our plan after the first mandate, 4 years, will receive $2,000 in their pocket that they will be allowed to spend. But Mr. Chrétien wanted to make a statement. Let me share a statement of his that he made at this debate in '93, and it goes this way. It's completely unacceptable that in a country like Canada, 1.6 million people are unemployed. 46% of those who have jobs are afraid of losing them. For the first time in our history, parents believe that the future of our children will be less promising than their own. It's time for a change.
Yes.
Mr. Chrétien said this in 93, and you know what? He's right. It's still time for a change.
We had to take over the mess that you left us. $42 billion, and this was pushing interest rates high. For every dollar that all governments were collecting, we had to pay 35 cents. To pay the interest, and we were going down in
But
a hole.
Mr. Chrétien, you said that you
to-
would reduce the deficit by making jobs the number one priority. You said you would reduce the deficit by growing the economy, by creating jobs instead of laying off the taxpayers.
Well, here I'm going to intervene and declare the end of round one. Okay. And we now turn to the audience. And as you can imagine, this is not a random group. Rather, they were carefully selected by an independent research company to achieve a regional and demographic representation of the country. In addition, we are told that they do not belong to any political party, and they haven't worked on either this election or the last one back in 1993. Each questioner has been asked to address one and only one leader on the given theme, and to keep their questions brief. Also, to the extent that it's possible, the producers will try to ensure that the questions are fairly distributed amongst the leaders by the end of all 5 sections. But ultimately, it's the audience that determines which leaders are given the opportunity to answer questions. Helping us in the audience are Donna Friesen, a reporter with CTV News, and Jacques Bourbeau, a reporter with Global Television. Jacques, you have some.
Our first question is from Debbie Hughes from Summerside, PEI, and she has a question for Jean Charest.
Mr. Charest, one of the most important jobs that is often overlooked is staying home with your children to raise them. Do you have any plans for tax breaks to families with young children?
Well, the tax breaks that we are proposing in our plan, Debbie, are going to be tax breaks that we want to apply, as I was mentioning a little earlier, to the employment insurance system, which is a tax on jobs, the most detrimental tax that you could impose on an employer or business person if they have a choice of creating jobs. The second one is a reduction in personal income taxes of 10%. The reason why we feel very strongly about that is because in Canada, disposable income of Canadians, what you have left in your pocket, has been steadily going down for the last few years. And in fact, in the United States, in the same period of time, it's gone up 11%. In Canada, it's gone down 1%. We feel it's very important we reverse that trend. In fact, let me tell you how urgent it is. If we don't, for the first time ever, we're going to have a generation of young Canadians with a lower standard of living than that of their parents. Those are the 2 most immediate things that we want to do, and hopefully that is going to go a long way in helping families with children start getting some more money in their pockets and spend more money. Thank you.
Donna, you have a question.
Yes, this is Don Ward from Rupert, Quebec, and he has a question for Gilles Duceppe.
Mr. Duceppe, as a fellow Quebecer, I can tell you exactly how to create a job. I do it daily. I'm self-employed. What I'd like to understand is how your government proposes, as an Anglophone in Quebec with such the atmosphere that is there now, how an Anglophone self-employed can create and flourish in Quebec. What kind of help can I get? It was the banks look at me as a small business and unreliable for some reason. Can you help me out with this, please?
Any woman, any man living in Quebec is a Quebecer, independently if he's French, English, or coming from minorities. So they have the same rights. And when you look at the situation among Anglophones and Francophones, you don't see that a huge difference. I would say that I'd like to see the rate of unemployment among Anglophones compared to the Francophones. So I don't see why the situation in Quebec would play against Anglophone. I really don't see that. I mean, if you're talking about political uncertainty, well, there's a lot of other countries are not stable at all. Think of Mexico. We're dealing with Mexico. We're making commerce with Mexico. There's not such a instability in Quebec. And even last year, I would say there were more foreign investment, private investment in Quebec than any other provinces. Not Canadian investment, but investment from foreign countries. So I don't see why an Anglophone would have such a problem living in Quebec. I mean, if you compare the situation of the Anglophones in Quebec with the Francophone outside Quebec, there's no comparison at all, sir.
Thank you very much. Donna? Oh, sorry, Jacques.
I'm with Robert Aljar from Nepean, Ontario, and he has a question for Jean Chrétien.
Good evening, sir. As Monsieur Charest said in his opening statement, and I agree with him, that lower taxes will result in more money in the pockets of hardworking Canadians. This will reinvigorate the economy and create jobs. Since jobs are your top priority, are you willing to commit that if elected to a second mandate, you will reduce the taxes to the 30% level, say, over the next few years?
I say that, thank you for your very good question. I say, sir, that first, we have to finish the job to have a balanced budget. And after that, half of the money that we'll have will be spent on social and economic programs that are needed, because we still have poverty in Canada and we still have economic problems in many parts of Canada. So we have to spend some money to help the economy to grow. The second part of the money will go for tax reduction and possibly, if we do very well, for debt reduction. But what we have done, and we have done some tax reduction in the last few years, but selective ones. For example, in the last budget, we have reduced the taxes by $850 million to go to the family with kids, families who are poor. We have reduced the taxes for the small business who are new people. We have reduced, they don't pay anymore the unemployment insurance contribution if it's a small business employing new people.
We have
done it with many other sectors in a selective way to make sure that it's not across the board giving a break big break to the rich and the big company. We have to select the people who can benefit most. Mr. Chrétien, we'd like to get one more question in, please. Thank you.
This is Michel Croteau from Sept-Îles, Quebec, and he has a question for Preston Manning.
Okay, sir. There is more and more industrial countries who now understand that wild and drastic cuts of employees in the public and private sectors don't have the expected economical benefits. That kind of cuts destroy the economic growth and the buying power of consumers. The USA at last begin to understand that. Is that kind of cuts over? And what will you do to stop companies who do that kind of cuts?
Well, our view is, like, the ultimate aim of your question, I thank you for your question, is like, how are you going to get more jobs? And our view is you balance the budget faster than what Mr. Martin and Mr. Chrétien have been doing. Yes, that involves some reducing the size of the federal government. But if you balance first and then deliver broad-based tax relief second, right on the heels of it. We have a large tax relief package for consumers. We have a tax relief package for Debbie here that makes the tax system neutral with respect to child care, and we deliver tax relief to small businesses. If you balance fast and deliver tax relief right on the heels of it, our view is that that creates more jobs than stretching out the balancing of the budget and giving the tax relief later on.
Mr. Manning, thank you very much. I'm sorry, but we're out of time for the questions, but there will be 4 more opportunities. We'll now turn to our second theme, health care and social programs. And Jason Moskowitz, you have a question, I believe, for Jean Charest.
Good evening, Mr. Charest. In terms of Medicare, we know that, to begin with, there's a lot of anxiety over jobs, as we just discussed, but Canadians are also very apprehensive about the future of Medicare and social programs. Mr. Charest, your party and other parties here, you promised to preserve Medicare, but the reality is that the provinces have more and more control of Medicare. With that in mind, how realistic are your promises on Medicare?
Well, thank you, Jason, for the question. And yes, there's a great deal of anxiety about health care in the country. There's something I've heard a lot about in the last 3 years. It's exactly that. There's a few reasons for that. Well, first of all, Canadians look at their system. They feel it isn't working. But the first reason why there's a lot of anxiety is because the Liberal government has slashed health care money, the money it transfers to the provinces, 40%. They did that unilaterally, without consultation, without any plan, even after saying that they were going to guarantee the funding. And there's also a changing population. Our population's growing older with less people in our system. I think what Canadians deserve, because this is a national asset, is a health care guarantee. It works this way. We put $1.4 billion more into health care. We stop the cuts immediately. 2, We negotiate with the provinces a health care guaranteed based on the 5 principles of the Canada Health Act, plus standards, in exchange for which we transfer tax points over, only then, and in exchange they get $2 billion more at the end of our first mandate for health care and education. That's what Canadians deserve, a health care guarantee.
Alexa McDonough.
Well, I think the problem we know is that the Liberals have cut $7 billion, the Conservatives want to cut $12 billion, Reform wants to cut $15 billion. And we're already putting our social programs under intense pressure. We've got to reinforce our Medicare system by recognizing that the federal government has to maintain a commitment to it. And Jean Charest's plan would be to get out of cash to health and get into tax points exclusively, which lessens the ability of the federal government to have any really meaningful say over health care. We've got to move forward with Medicare. We've got to expand it to provide for home care, to provide for prescription drugs. And it's not just about spending more money either. The federal government knows perfectly well that they made a commitment to get out of Bill C-91, which is pumping money from the scarce health dollars into the profits of multinational pharmaceutical companies. We could be redirecting that money into a pharmacare program for all Canadians.
Gilles Duceppe.
Yes, I've listened to the 1993 debate, and Mr. Chrétien was saying that he wouldn't touch social programs. And what he did last year and this year is cutting $4.5 billion to the transfer payments to the province. What we're asking is that the federal government should inject the necessary money into social transfers so that the provinces could face the problems they have in healthcare and post-secondary education and social assistance. But it's always the same rationale with Ottawa. You're making the decision and then you're forcing the provinces to face huge problems. And we're asking you to stop that, to stop imposing normal national standards, and to re-inject the money you cut in the last 2 years.
Jean Chrétien.
For me, social solidarity is fundamental characteristic of Canada. And I'm very proud over my career that I've been part of governments that have brought Medicare, the Guaranteed Income Supplement, Child Tax Credit, Canada Pension Plan, and many others. But when we formed the government, we were faced with a situation of bankruptcy, and we had to do something. And, of course, we have cut transfer payments, and we have cut everybody. We have cut transfer payments less than when we have cut the government. But we have, as soon as we saw the situation improving, we have already reinvested $1.5 billion. The decision was made a few weeks ago. That's the money that Mr. Charest talked about. But what is important is to make sure, and it's why I disagree with Mr. Charest, it's make sure that the 5 conditions of Medicare are respected, because otherwise there will be a Medicare for the rich and a Medicare for the rest of the people.
Preston Manning.
Reform's plan here is to balance the federal budget, run surpluses, and reinvest a portion of the surpluses, $4 billion a year, back into health care. But the bigger problem here, and I'm the only leader that was here with you, Mr. Chrétien, in the last leaders' debate, I heard you promise to maintain health transfers at the current level, and you stopped and you said, I guarantee it. The fact is you've cut the health and social transfer by $7 billion or by 40,000. You've put money into Bombardier that should have gone into hospitals. You put money into a canoe museum in your riding that could have gone into hospitals. And the voters are going to hold you accountable. How can they believe you on guaranteeing health care when that's your record on a promise made in the last leaders' debate?
Jason?
Mr. Charest, Canadians have seen hospitals closed across the country. They've seen service reduced. You say it's the Liberals' fault. But it seems that Medicare is certainly getting smaller rather than larger. If you were Prime Minister, would those hospitals reopen across the country?
The provincial governments have to decide how they administer their services, but there's one thing I know about this debate. No one can stand here tonight and say, I'm going to guarantee health care through the federal system, when they then turn around and cut cash transfers 40% without any plan and unilaterally. You can't do that. You can't talk out of both sides of your mouth. Yes, we can guarantee our health care system because it's a shared value among Canadians. Canadians want this health care system to work. And that's what I think will bring the governments to the table and make this happen, by stopping the cuts, putting more money in, also by negotiating on the five principles of the Canada Health Act plus standards that we then have to deliver in the healthcare system. Then and only then would I transfer the tax points over, which happen to grow in value, which means that at the end there's $2 billion more to spend for healthcare. What I will not do tonight, though, is what Mr. Chrétien did when in the last debate he said we have to maintain the same level of transfer for all programs for the next 5 years, not only Medicare, but university and other social programs. And I guarantee that we'll do that. Well, it's a good thing Mr. Chrétien didn't say it was a money-back guarantee. Otherwise, he'd be broke today, because what he did was exactly the contrary. And he had a choice in this regard. When he says that he cut everybody, what he didn't mention is that this same government also said that they would cut spending in Ottawa, program spending, by 19%. That's the commitment they made in 1995. Yet they missed that objective, that target, by 50%. And so let me get this clear. They're taking the money off your paycheck every week to create a surplus in the Employment Insurance Fund. They haven't missed cutting health care and cash transfers to the provinces, but they missed cutting program spending in Ottawa. That's the choice that they have made, and I'm proposing a very different choice to Canadians, one based on our shared values and the common will to deliver these services.
The promise made last debate has been broken. Why should people believe you this time?
About what he just said, because he always forget to talk about the tax points that the province received. That this is part of the transfer. He refused to talk about the transfer of equalization payments that are transferred to the provinces.
But what about the commitment? What about the commitment? You made this commitment to maintain last year, and you broke it. Like, why should Canadians believe the commitment that you make now?
But I have to tell you this, that when we started, we had $42 billion, not of deficit, not the 32
no,
that was
you
written in the last
You knew that when you made the commitment.
We had to cut.
And you had
we
choices.
We had to cut, and we cut everybody.
Why did you miss your target in Ottawa?
17% of the programs of the government and only 9% of the transfer payment to the provinces.
But you knew that, Mr. Chrétien.
Now that we're doing well, we have reinvested $1.5 billion right away.
You knew
in
what
Medicare.
The deficit was, Mr. Chrétien, when you made that commitment. We all knew the deficit was in the vicinity of $40 to $50 billion. You knew the commitment, yet you said you would maintain health care at current levels. Now, why should people believe
I'd like to tell
when
you,
you say you'll preserve
you
it
were
now?
with me in that debate.
I was.
And you remember, Madame, the Prime Minister at that time, I and Monsieur Bouchard, we asked the Conservative Party at that time what was to be the deficit. We were all skeptical about the $31 billion. It turned out to be 42. She could not reply.
We're still
so we had to make the assumption
you have a margin of maneuver now,
of
Mr. Chrétien. You have a margin of maneuver of at least $8 billion, and most probably of $12 billion. So it's possible to re-inject that money to the provinces, the money you cut for the transfer payments.
The first time that we saw the light at the end of the tunnel was when it was evident that we were 1 year and a half ahead of our program.
Campaign was called.
No.
Didn't say it in February.
When the election campaign was called, is when the light appeared at the end of the tunnel.
April 1st, you didn't know you were going to be $8 billion ahead on deficit reduction. No wonder we're in trouble with finances.
There is a cabinet decision about that, and I have written to all the premiers. The cabinet decision was made, and after we received the figures that we were doing better than expected, and the first dividend that we wanted to give because the economy was doing better than predicted went exactly to Medicare.
Maybe the Prime Minister wants to share with us. Maybe the Prime Minister wants to share with us the cabinet documents on which that
you
decision
haven't done one single thing to reinvest any of the money in health care that you've taken out. And we're talking about billions and billions of dollars, not once, but year after year after year. On the first day of this election, when you announced that you were putting money back into health care, that was not the truth. You were only locking in the cuts that you'd already introduced in year 1 and year 2. You're proceeding with 11 more months of cuts to a healthcare system that's already bleeding, and you're only saying that next year, maybe, if we believe your election promises, you won't proceed with the third year.
You're blaming all the cuts on the last administration. I'd like to tell you something, Madame McDonough, that Mr. Romano closed down 58 hospital when I was in the opposition.
And tell the truth.
And he said
replaced
clearly,
every cent. The Romano government replaced every cent that you took out of health care in the form of federal health transfers.
But isn't the
every
solution,
cent,
isn't
and
the
then
solution
some money.
Here, we should be searching
Is that
for
not
the
the
solution.
truth? Is that not the truth?
Shouldn't we be searching
The
for a
Saskatchewan
solution
government
here?
has replaced
Shouldn't we be looking for
every
a
cent
solution?
of what your government took out of the Saskatchewan health care
I'm happy to offer a solution.
The solution is to balance the budget fast to get to surpluses, and then you've got money to reinvest in injured social programs. This is what 7 of the provinces done, and that's what you should be doing.
No, it's exactly what we say. When you're promising only tax cut, we said that half of the profit we'll have when the books will be balanced will go for social and economic programs, and the other half for tax cuts.
If I may,
so that is a more balanced approach.
Mr.
You
Charest?
want to cut taxes to the big corporations.
Mr.
We
Charest?
want to cut it in a.
Mr. Chrétien, Mr. Charest.
Yes.
Well, let's be clear on the whole issue of tax cuts. From the beginning of this campaign, as it has evolved, the issue of whether we can or not reduce taxes is one that's resolved. Mr. Chrétien has done that himself by putting out a red book that proposes to spend more money. So the issue is resolved. There is money there. The issue is he going to spend it, or is it going to return to your pockets? That's one issue. Now, Mr. Chrétien, interestingly enough, on this whole issue of health care, discovered this issue once the election campaign was launched. He's just said that he saw the light at the end of the tunnel. Well, ladies and gentlemen, the light that he saw at the end of the tunnels was the white of the eyes of the Canadian voter. And it's the only reason why he changed his mind, because it certainly wasn't going to happen with the opposition parties he had in the House of Commons, who were unable to fight these health care cuts, even though they were so drastic. And yes, we can do differently. If I can finish, the reason why I want to offer Canadians a health care guarantee is for this reason, so that never again a Prime Minister can do what Mr. Chrétien has done, say I'll guarantee it, and then cut. By having the covenant and the deal with the provinces, never again can a Prime Minister cut our health care the way Jean Chrétien has.
You have the same credibility problem as the Prime Minister. You have the same credibility problem. You were in government for 9 years. You did not deliver tax relief. You raised federal taxes 71 times. You brought us the 3% surtax, the 5% surtax, the GST. Why would the public believe that you could deliver tax relief now when you never did it during those 9 years? You got the same problem as him.
Mr. Manning, there was an
election in
Mike Harris that spoke very clearly on that. But I'd like to redo history with you and Mr. Chrétien tonight. The fact of the matter, there's not a sick person in the country tonight who's going to be helped by your recitation of history. There's not an unemployed person tonight in this country that's going to be helped by you trying to talk about the last 12 years. I'm interested in talking about the next 12 years. I'm interested about talking about the future, and I've spent 3.5 years, to tell you the truth, listening very carefully to Canadians, so that I could be prepared for this night and for this election campaign
Mr.
to talk about the
you have no moral authority to discuss Social Security unless you give up your $4.3 million pension plan. Will you do that? Will you commit to that tonight? Yes or no?
Mr. Manning,
you got to get
Mr. Manning, you're in a very
issue.
difficult position to talk about credibility on this issue after you showed up in Ottawa saying we're going to be differently, cynically gave away the keys
Our
to the car,
MPs gave
and then
up
we
all
find
their
out,
MPs.
then we find out that you have a personal, non-receivable tax expense account that you and your family have. You're in a bad position, Mr. Manning, to give lessons to others.
Mr. Chrétien,
you can see what I have to cope with in the House of Commons all the time. You know, the problem we're discussing at this time is when we became the government, we had a mess that was left by the Tories, $42 billion.
And now it's
Of course, we cannot, when you're a government, do everything you want to do, especially when the deficit is $11 billion more. We had, and I'm sorry, we could not do everything we want, but look at what we've done. We have managed to restore the credibility of Canada.
Everything start with the number one priority. You said it was going to be jobs.
And the best.
Can't do everything. Start with
it's
the
social
priority.
program, but you won't have any social programs in Canada if you have a bankrupt nation. If half of the money eventually was to go to pay the interest of the debt. So we had first to cure the big problem of the nation, and we've done it.
But what you haven't done, you got a margin of maneuver to inject the necessary money into transfer payments. 4.5 billion you cut last year and this year, and also to stop using unemployment insurance funds just to reduce your deficit. Would you agree with that? You got the margin of maneuver to do something.
Yes, and that's
when
the
you
problem.
have an insurance scheme that was in deficit when we started, any good management makes sure that he has a reserve for the future, because it's the way insurance
you have a
works.
reserve of
and
$10
at the same
billion.
time, let me finish. At the same time, we have reduced the premium from $3.30 to $2.90, and it will be $2.80 in January. It's difficult to manage the country, but look at the progress that the country has made in the last 3 years and 7 months.
I'm going to.
The world say that we're doing better.
I'm going to call.
And I'm optimistic about the future.
I'm going to call the end now of this round, and we will go to questions from the audience. And I might ask the leaders if they could to keep their responses relatively short so that we can get to as many questions as possible. Donna, you have someone with a question.
Yes, this is Margaret Bokoff from Alexandria, Ontario, and she has a question for Mr. Chrétien.
Good evening. I have a degree in economics, and I've already heard way too many numbers quoted here. I wonder if you have a plan for how to spend the money better. Whatever amount you're going to spend, can you spend it any better than it's being spent now for healthcare?
For us, we say that all the provincial government, Madame, and the federal government, we were faced with a difficult situation. As I explained to Madame McDonough, the problem in healthcare was there. In Saskatchewan, they had to close, and I don't blame them, 58 hospitals before I became the Prime Minister. This healthcare system needed reform, and every provincial government has worked very hard to do just that. And for us, we say that we will keep increasing the transfer payments to the provinces. We had to cut there like anybody else. You cannot reduce the deficit only on a few parts of the government. You have to be cutting around the government is the same way. Canada was spending 10.5% of GDP on health care, and it was one of the highest in the world. And everybody agreed that it could be managed better. And it is the Health Forum who said that there is, at this moment, if we were to go back to $12.5 billion, what the money we put back is going us there. They said that there is enough money in the healthcare system at this moment to operate, but we have to change the system because people
Mr.
stay
Chrétien,
less
we're
long,
going to try to
just
get in
less
as
long
many answers,
in hospital,
many
and we have
questions
to
as
talk
can.
about medication for them when they are out of hospital. So
Mr.
these are
Chrétien,
the
thank
changes
you.
we need.
Jacques?
I'm with Tanya Youngberg. She lives in Ottawa, and she has a question for Mr. Charest.
Mr. Charest, you are asking for dramatic cuts in taxes and a more balanced budget, but at the same time you're calling for an improved healthcare system that's going to be guaranteed. But you have not yet indicated where the money is going to come from for an improved healthcare while cutting all the government spending.
Well, thank you, and that is, Tanya, a very important question. And it all boils down to choices. And it's worth stopping a second to look at what we're dealing with now in the country. Governments at all levels, and by the way, of all political parties, persuasion, are all agreed on the fact that we have to balance our books, start paying down our debt. Everyone agrees on that. The real debate for us for the future of our country is the choices we're going to make as we go along the way, and that will really speak to our values. Now, the choices that I'm proposing are these ones. I think we have to balance our books. I want to do it by the year 2000. Yes, we are proposing reductions in spending. We have detailed this in the plan that we have here, that Let the Future Begin. We're the only party that has included the detail, by the way. And by the way, the cuts we're proposing are tough. You're from the Ottawa area. I don't want to pretend that they're not. They are difficult. There's difficult choices, but I believe they're the right choices. And by reducing spending $12 billion, also legislating a law to balance the books, a law that will also demand that the Prime Minister and the ministers be accountable for that. If they don't meet their targets, their pay will be cut. We will then be able to make a better choice, put more money into health care and other programs. That's the approach, the choice we would make.
Thank you, Jacques. Do you have someone else? Sorry, Donna.
This is Paul Walsh from London, Ontario. He has a question for Mr. Manning.
Yes, Mr. Manning, I would like to know, with your ideas on how to keep our health care and all our other social programs going, but the one thing I have yet to hear tonight
is on the fact of this massive debt this country is going to struggle with and is going to keep struggling on with for years.
We have this fiscal plan that addresses both dimensions of your question. And in a way, it's our answer to a lot of the questions that have been asked here tonight. First, balance the budget as fast as you can. And we spell out how we do it. We do it by reducing the size of the government, and we do it by 98, 99. Then you run surpluses. And then you invest the surpluses three ways. One, you put something back into the social programs that have been hurt. We propose health and education, $4 billion a year. We use a large portion of the surpluses for tax relief, and we put the rest into debt reduction, an initial $5 to $10 billion in debt reduction, and then set up the system in the future so that a fixed proportion of future surpluses go to debt retirement. And that way you address the three things you want to do once you have the budget balanced.
Jacques? Jacques?
Yes, I'm with Pat Spensley. She's from Montreal, and she has a question for Ms. McDonough.
The alternative federal budget is formed each year by a coalition of ordinary people as well as prominent economists. It gives alternatives for not having to cut painfully social services and health care. How would your government implement some of these policies?
Well, thank you very much, and you're absolutely right that the alternative federal budget, because there hasn't been the kind of presence in the House of Commons to force these guys to talk about alternatives, has kept before the Canadian people a clear sense that there is a better way, there is a different way. And the better way is to make jobs the number one priority. And the better way is to recognize that we can't cut so fast and so deep our health and education and other vital services, because it not only reduces services and forces people to pay for them when they're not able to pay for them in many cases, but also is a jobs killer. And I think that the alternative budget is a clear articulation of a different way of going about it, one that acknowledges that we shouldn't just govern for the wealthy, talking about tax cuts across the board, which basically are paid for by robbing the pockets of ordinary working people.
Thank you very much. And we now go on to our third theme, which has been obviously anticipated, which is government choices on the economy. And Peter Kent, you have a question for Alexa McDonough.
Well, deficit fighting was a preoccupation of the last election. Deficit elimination is now on the horizon, but it's clear that you all have different visions of where that horizon is or should be. Nonetheless, there are more choices. Ms. McDonough, you have favoured the most drastic adjustment of Canada's economic levers, major new taxes and significant new spending. Why the sharp change in direction?
Well, of course, it's not a change in the direction in the sense that we have always argued for a fair tax system. And what that means is that everybody should pay their fair share. We know in this country that hardworking people are paying their fair share. But it's not the idea of fairness of most Canadians that there are immensely wealthy people in this country who pay very little in taxes. There are profitable corporations in this country who pay not 1 red cent of corporate income tax. And this is ridiculous at a time when there aren't monies available for something as basic as health, education, and other vital services. Just since the Liberals came to office, over $50 billion in corporate profits have gone totally untaxed. There were 67,000 profitable companies in this country that weren't paying any corporate taxes, corporate income taxes, when the Liberals came to office, and their contribution to tax fairness 3 years later was to increase that to 82,000 profitable corporations.
Jean Chrétien.
For us, a strong economy is the essence of a strong society. And I agree that everybody has to pay a fair share, but we have to have priorities, as I said earlier. We want to balance the book. And I think we can do it in a very civilized way. But, of course, you talk about taxes. When we came to the government, we had worked very hard to make sure that everybody pays more. There's only 2 departments that the budgets were not cut. One was Indian Affairs and the other one was National Revenue. And today, to reply to you, when we started as a government, the corporations were paying $9.4 billion in taxes, and now they pay $16 billion because we have plugged many of the holes that existed. So it's the way to operate, that to make sure that everybody pay his fair share in the tax system, but you need a government that is committed to that, and it's exactly what we've done. But it's good administration. But we have to keep in mind that it's not only tax cut that is important in society, it's to look at the reality that there is social and economic problems that will be faced by the government.
Charest.
Well, thank you. This is very much an issue about choices, about whether or not, as a country, we're going to be able to focus on the right priorities. And we do have choices. I mean, to pretend that we didn't over the last few years is completely wrong. Look at the choices that the government has made. It has chosen to overtax Canadians in the employment insurance system, which was never designed to reduce the deficit. It wasn't designed for that reason. There'll be a $17 billion surplus in that system after 3 years. I think we have to make a different choice. We have to recognize that government has to be smaller, more focused. I want a national government that's going to do less things but get them right. I'd like to see us reduce the size of government, make a commitment to balance our books, legislate that, and commit the part of the Cabinet to make that happen by cutting their pay if they don't. I want us to go further also by reinvesting in health care, in education, and ensuring pensions for the future. Those are areas where I think the country wants us to focus, where Canadians want to see us deliver very strong policies that will guarantee them some peace of mind for the future.
Preston Manning.
I've outlined our fiscal plan and how we would allocate resources. There are two other dimensions, quality of life dimensions, that I think are worth mentioning. One is that we would like to strengthen families. We see families as being the baseline social unit. They're under more strain because of the reductions we've made in social spending. So we propose these measures to put more dollars in the pockets of families, $2,000 for the average family of 4 by the year 2000. The other quality of life priority for us is a big one, is the whole area of crime. To change the balance there, to put the rights of victims of crime, law-abiding citizens, ahead of those of criminals, through tightening up the Young Offenders Act, the parole system, a Victims' Bill of Rights, focusing on criminal use of firearms rather than simply gun registration. Quality of life elements.
Gilles Duceppe.
I think we should respect the Auditor General's recommendation. He made an important recommendation. That means $3 billion. $3 billion. And also revise the taxation to have a fairer tax system. When I was talking about capital gains, only taxed 75%, while in employment income is taxed 100%. We can't accept that. We can't accept that. And also we have to be sure we don't keep those fiscal paradise which companies use to have their head offices. Even the Minister of Finance companies, some of them are in Bermuda or in Liberia, while we're asking people not to work under the table. I do agree that we have to ask people not to do underground economy, but that example should come first of all from people like the Minister of Finance.
Thank you. Peter Kent.
Ms. McDonough, there's broad agreement among independent economists that your numbers, the NDP numbers, simply don't add up, and you've had to make billions of dollars of corrections in your campaign estimates.
Well, let me say that's just not the case, that in fact we did make a mistake. We put a chart in there and two figures that related to that chart that didn't belong in there. It was a mistake. Within 24 hours we discovered it, we corrected it, we put out the correct information. It didn't change our bottom lines, it didn't change our projections, it didn't change the impact on our programs. But let me say what Canadians are more concerned about. They're more concerned about the mistakes that this Prime Minister has made that he still hasn't apologized for and he still hasn't corrected. He made a commitment in the 93 election to get rid of the GST. It still hasn't happened. He made a commitment in the 93 election not to cut social transfers, cut $7 billion out, and he's still cutting. He made a commitment to make jobs the #1 priority. Canadians are still waiting, and I think these are the kinds of mistakes that the people of Canada want addressed.
Well, can I start by saying one thing about this whole role of government, which is the issue we're talking about. One thing I think is important to understand. In Canada, there's an important role for a national government. There is one. I'm not one who thinks that the Government of Canada doesn't have a constructive role. Quite to the contrary. Our challenge, though, is to recognize that for the last 30 years, governments have been trying to do too much. And out of good faith, maybe. I mean, we try to put forward a program, solve a problem. We've gone too far. We moved away from our basic culture. That's why we have to now turn in the other direction, return to what has worked well for Canadians, an economy with strong economic growth that produces jobs. Growth means allowing Canadians to keep the money they earn. It means doing away with this $5 billion senseless tax on jobs that, frankly, just shocks me that we allow this to happen. That returning and reducing personal income taxes is going to allow Canadians to at least start to reverse the trend of diminishing incomes. And a good question to ask ourselves tonight is, why is it that in Canada we have double the unemployment rate that our neighbour at the south of the United States has? Why is it that in Canada, in the last 3 years, real disposable income has gone down 1%, while at the same period of time, disposable income in the United States has gone up 11%? Now, there's a reason for that. I mean,
yes,
we must be doing something wrong,
and
someone's doing something right. And when Mr. Chrétien says it's because of the deficit, I beg to defer with him. But in this campaign, he's put out a book in which he's ready to spend more money. He keeps saying that they have to balance the books, yet he's ready to spend $10 million on art for the new millennium.
Mr.
I happen to think
Chrétien?
Canadians can give, or money for a commissioner for agriculture. Why is he ready to spend that money, yet he continues to say there's a deficit in the debt?
The programs exist in our society. I think that we will have the millennium. A country like Canada can celebrate the millennium. I guess that it's a very important date. But when you talk, Mr. Charest, about all the time that you will reduce the unemployment insurance premium, what is your credibility? It was $195 when it was a few years before your term was finished, and you move it to $330. We have reduced it from $330 to $190, to $290, and we're going down, according to, until we have a reserve, because when you have an insurance scheme, you need a reserve. We had to pay your deficit from there. And for Madame McDonough, when I look at her program, she's talking, as Peter said earlier, that does not add up very much. You're always proposing spending and spending and spending. And I'd like to quote to you what I could quote a few things from Tony Blair, who has changed from the old Labour NDP type.
Not as much as the Liberal Party has changed. Not as much as the Federal Liberal Party has changed.
It would be very interesting.
Abandoning its traditional values.
I would like to say, some say spend every available penny on more government spending on every conceivable public service. Keep things exactly as they were 10 and 20 years ago, no matter what the cost. In my view, there is nothing progressive about blindly defending the past. You know who said that? Roy Romano. Because he is a premier and he knows what it is to be responsible and putting order into the finances of the province.
Mr. Chrétien, may I address your question? Can
I ask Madam Chairman just a question?
Why don't you tell Canadians the truth?
Are we on a role of government, or it's very hard to tell from what's being said here what subject anybody is on?
The actual issue that was raised was government choices on the economy. However you wish to interpret it, that is all up to you.
Okay. So for me, I would just say that I believe that a government can be a force for good in society, and the government cannot do everything. And it is the balance of
a second to respond to Mr. Chrétien in regards to the ideas that we're talking about. He asked where we take them. I've just spent 3.5 years listening, learning, maybe learning the hard way. Well, learning the hard way about a lot of these issues. But I spent those 3.5 years with Canadians, and I think I have a pretty good sense of what they know. One thing I want to mention to give you an example, Mr. Chrétien. You say that it's worth spending $10 million on art for the millennium. I believe in art. I'm a big believer in arts for this country. But I also happen to believe that given our financial situation, that if Canadians believe in the millennium, they believe in their country, they'll be ready to give the art away. You don't have to take their money to spend $10 million on art. That's a difference between your choice and my choice.
If we are talking about
there will be no money available from government for art.
Mr. Manning is not.
If we're talking about choices of government, isn't the bigger overriding issue is how to hold governments accountable for the choices that they make? And that touches everything that we're talking about here. And I'd like to ask each of you, because this is a problem. The public is so skeptical that they can't hold us accountable. And I'd ask each of you, would you be willing to put in the hands of the public the right to fire you and your MPs if they broke their promises after this election? Would you support this concept of recall in the hands of the voters in order to give them a tool to hold us accountable for the choices that we make? Mr. Chrétien.
For me, I don't agree with that because we are elected.
With accountability.
And the accountability is at this moment. The people in every riding will choose their members of parliament. Because who will be the arbitrator?
Between elections.
You know, you said, for example, that there were to be free votes in the House of Commons. And we had more free vote than your party. So you would have been recalled right away.
You could give free votes.
The problem is for us is the people have a choice today. They are looking at 5 parties and they are looking at members of parliament. It is the way that democracy works.
So you would not support giving voters recall in between elections to hold you accountable for broken promises?
Because I had a few by-elections and you blame me for by-elections that it was costing money. So every time that there will be a recall, there will be another by-election, the guy will come in the House,
the voters would know
will make a mistake, he will be recalled again.
Mr. Charest, would you support recall as an accountability? Would you support recall as an accountability? Would you, Mr. Charest, would you support recall?
You promised one. For the question. Since you've offered me the opportunity to speak on this issue, I also happen to think that one of the things, as I look towards the new century in terms of the role of the Prime Minister, that should change is that the Prime Minister should also offer Canadians some leadership in regards to some key issues that go maybe beyond jurisdictions. One of the things I feel very strongly about is the area of education and training. If there's one thing where I think the country has to do a lot better is making sure kids finish school. One of the things I want to do is make sure there's a youth strategy where every young person is either in school and training, at work, or doing community service. And I'm ready, as a Prime Minister, to use the employment insurance system to make that happen, to take that money, to spend it on internship, mentorship, co-op education, to help them make that transition from either unemployment into a job. And by the way, in the end, I don't think it would be right to have income support that pay young people to stay at home.
To intervene in education now with national standards. Is that what you're proposing?
I'm not proposing. I'm proposing to do what governments and the Federation should do. Each complement the other's efforts. Set common goals. The Prime Minister of the country should be a leader, able to set common goals for the country and say, here's the new horizon. I happen to think the Prime Minister should be somebody who points the way, not someone who spends all his time pointing the finger, but able to say to Canadians, here's where we should be going. Here are the few key priorities for the country.
Don't you think provinces are able to manage the education system by themselves?
Because Mr. Charest, you talk about internship. We have this program at this moment. It's existing. We have it. We are helping young people to work with corporations, to work on international trade, to work with government. We have this program already. So we have done. You talk in your program that you will connect by year 2000 all the schools and all the libraries in Canada. But I'm sorry to tell you, it will be done next year. We're already 2 years ahead of your program.
I'm talking about something different. I'm talking about a national objective where every young person should either be in school, in training, at work, or doing community service. That's what I'm talking about. To do that, I'm ready to call a national conference in the first 6 months of my mandate with the private sector, non-governmental organizations, governments at all levels, for the purpose of setting this common objective, rallying the country around it, and then using the levers we control each at our level, Mr. Duceppe. I'm not talking about intervening in areas of provincial jurisdiction, but what I do think does not make sense is having an income support program like employment insurance that does not support our objectives in education and training. I want to change that for the country. I want to change it for the next century. I want to do it rapidly so that we can make sure that every young Canadian has the tools they need to take advantage of those opportunities.
Heard from Ms. McDonough.
You want to talk about giving our young people the best start in life, but you have no trouble at all spending unemployment insurance funds that are literally taking the food out of the mouths of children. As a result of the choices that this government is making and you are proposing to make, we are talking about a situation where more than half of the unemployed in this country today aren't eligible for 1 single cent.
of unemployment insurance, not 1 cent of income support. And you want us to believe that your top priority is giving our young people the best start in life? Does nobody that served in this Parliament over the last 3.5 years in your parties have a problem with the fact that you've created 600,000 more children living in poverty in Canada, in a country where there's more wealth than there has ever been?
And it's exactly for that, Madame McDonough, that in the last budget we had given tax credit for families with poor families with children, $850 million.
And as a result of the budget that you brought in, you made 380,000 more poor kids, even worse off than if you hadn't introduced that budget.
And we've done it in collaboration with
380,000 poor kids.
At the last federal provincial meeting with the premiers, we collectively agreed that child poverty was a problem. And it was proposed by provincial government and federal government, and everybody agreed to that it was a priority. It's why, for me, social problems exist in our society. I don't think that it is a big preoccupation with the two right-wing parties.
Mr. Chrétien, how can you say that this was an attack on child poverty when 380,000 more Canadian children living in poverty are going to be worse off this year than if you hadn't introduced the budget?
With respect, Mr. Chrétien, Canadians are poorer today than when you were elected in 1993. There are more poor people today than when you were elected in 1993. The jobless rate for young Canadians is higher. We've had more. The participation rate of Canadians in the labour market is lower. So please, I don't think you're in a position to turn now to other people and say that our positions are not legitimate because or irresponsible, when in fact all I'm proposing to do is allow Canadians to keep their money.
I'm going to
because
call an end to this section of debate. I'm going to call an end to this section of debate, and we're now going to turn to some of the questions from the audience. Donna, do you have a...
Yes, I do. This is Betty K. Murray from Peterborough, Ontario. She has a question for Mr. Manning.
Mr. Manning, you said that one of the things that you want to spend money on is quality of life and specifically making families stronger, strengthening families. I would like to know how you propose to do this with economics.
Well, there's two dimensions to this strengthening the family. The first is not economic at all, but it's government starting to recognize the value of parenting. And governments recognizing that the family is the social unit that is picking up the slack when the health care system gets into trouble, when the pension system is not providing adequate income for elderly people, when the children are not adequately being provided for. It's to recognize as a formal statement by government the value of parenting. Now, just that recognition by itself is not sufficient. We say one of the ways to put some economic muscle behind it is to leave more dollars in the pockets of families to care for their own members and to spend. We have this tax relief package that does that. It particularly extends the child care tax deduction, converts it into a credit, makes it available to all parents regardless of how they choose to care for their children. In other words, it creates choices for family. They can make the decisions to work or not to work, how to care for their children, and the tax system will treat them exactly the same. So family-friendly tax policies, but social policies that put the family as the first unit and recognize the value of parenting for the value that it is.
John?
I have a question from Carl Cundiff. He lives in Sydney, British Columbia, and he has a question for Mr. Chrétien.
Good evening, Mr. Chrétien. I would like to ask you your help in my understanding of why an election is being held with a year and a half to still run in the mandate and the cost efficiency to the voters of Canada. Thank you.
For me, sir, we were ahead of our program, and already the campaign had started. All the parties were advertising, many of the leaders were campaigning across the land, and it was for me to decide to have an election in June or in October. A normal mandate is 4 years. And I did not want to have a type of campaign 7 months like in the United States. And in terms of managing the affair of the nation, to have an election in June, prepared for whoever forms the government, will have the summer to prepare the program so that you can start anew in September and have a normal years of operation. These were the reason, because we worried. Everybody, the debate has started. Everybody expected an election. All the people said that the election is either in the spring, we do it early summer, or in the fall. And it was my decision that I felt that the time has come to have this present debate so that we can tackle the very difficult problem right in September so that there will not be a loss of time.
Thank you very much.
That is a tradition of Canada, that when the government is not in difficulty, the tradition is you call the election in the 4th years, and we are in the 4th years at this moment.
Thank you, Mr. Chrétien. Donna?
This is Alana Brownlee from Winnipeg, and she also has a question for Mr. Chrétien.
You've indicated that you feel in this last budget that the child tax credit has reduced child poverty. The effect of the reduction in the transfer payments to the provinces has drastically cut the social programs, particularly in Manitoba. It's resulted in cuts to welfare payments, primarily cutting, the most drastic cut being for children under the age of 5. How do you propose to redress this in your upcoming budgets to effectively reduce child poverty?
For us, Madam, it's a very important question you're asking, and for us, we had first to make sure that the finances of the nation were in good standing. You know, every year more money was going to pay for the interest rates and paying very often abroad to bankers and financiers, so we had to put orders. We had, unfortunately, it was not pleasant for anybody, and provincial government had to do that too. We had to cut to make sure that we're having a balanced budget. We're not there yet. We will be there soon. But when we saw that we had an opening because we're doing better than predicted, we have restored $1.5 billion that was supposed to be taken away from the provinces next year and the year after. And with that, that will stop the cuts, and we have instituted this $850 million in tax credit for poor families so that this problem can be attended for.
Thank you. Jacques?
I'm with Diane Power. She lives in Fredericton, New Brunswick, and she has a question for Mr. Charest.
Good evening, Mr. Charest. Mr. Charest, you talked about choices that Canadians have to make as we enter the millennium. And there's one choice that I haven't heard discussed at all, and I want to know where it falls out in terms of your economic strategies, and that's the choice to protect our environment to ensure that we can do any of these other measures at all.
Well, and that's a very important issue for this country. Just to put it in some perspective, Canada, of all the industrialized countries in the world, is the country that lives the most off its environment, as you know, Diane. I mean, it's softwood lumber, pulp and paper, energy, whether hydrocarbons or hydroelectricity, agriculture, fishery, the list goes on and on. Furthermore, we're a country that depends a lot on trade to earn our way, so the way we manage our environment is going to be very much an economic issue for us. One of the things that I want to do, that I want to change in this rationalization of government in Ottawa, is to create a Department of Sustainable Development with a longer-term view. And what we'll do to make that happen is merge departments of fishery, agriculture, natural resources, and environment together. And the view brought to these departments is how we manage our resources for the longer term. I'm also a very, very big believer in defending our position, especially in regards to the United States. I've been very worried about this government's lack of spine in regards to some of these matters. In acid rain, for example, but also the cleaning up of the dew sites. You may remember that recently they concluded a deal with the Americans that said that they would pay $100 million at the condition that they buy American technology, when in fact the estimated cost of cleaning up the dew sites is $500 million.
Thank you very much.
That is a failure, I think, in regards to how we manage our environment.
We have time for one more brief question. Donna?
This is Bruce Meinecker from Scarborough, Ontario. He has a question for Ms. McDonough.
Yes, hello. Well, actually, you've been hammering the Liberals this last few days in the media on their health cuts, yet you've proposed a $15 billion increase, I believe, according to the media. How would you expect to presume or to begin to believe that you could bring the deficit down?
Well, let me make very clear, and Mr. Chrétien chose not to address this question, that the NDP platform and our spending proposals, in fact, are at a lower level of deficit. In other words, our deficit reduction level is below that introduced by the Liberals in their April 1st 97 budget. So if they are being critical of our deficit reduction target and our level of spending, they must be braced for a great deal of criticism for theirs, which was less fiscally sound than the proposal that we put forward. But let me say very clearly that we have made it the priority, that jobs, that growing the economy, that generating tax funds where people now would be happy to pay taxes if they had jobs. People are much happier if they have jobs and can pay their fair share of taxes. We've also talked about closing the loopholes because we have immense leakage from our tax system. Even the International Monetary Fund has said that tax breaks to big corporations and to the wealthy in Canada are overly generous and can't be afforded. The Auditor General has said that we have to address the fact that so many of the tax revenues that are needed in this country are going in breaks for the wealthiest and the most profitable corporations.
Thank you very much. And our agreed upon time limit for this question period is now run out. We now get to our fourth theme, which is national unity. And Craig Oliver, yes, you do exist. And you have a question, I believe, for Jean Chrétien.
And for everyone else, not to raise the ghosts of the dozens of failed constitutional conferences that took place in this very room, Canada will have to reach some kind of an accommodation with Quebec in the term of the next government. Even though there is no appetite out there, I'd like to know from all of you what kind of an offer you think should be made to Quebec and what process should be followed, but particularly for the Prime Minister, I'd like to say to you that you reassured us before the last referendum that if we all shut up, everything would be just fine, and then you almost lost the country. So what assurances do Canadians have that you're the man to lead us into one again?
You know, Greg, I have spent my life working to bring Canadians together. And it is, in fact, the most important duty of a Prime Minister. We've gone through difficult times, but we've made some progress. I do not believe in big schemes. I believe in solving problems one by one at a time. And we have done it, not only with Quebec. We have, for example, settled the problem of manpower training with Alberta, New Brunswick, Newfoundland, Manitoba, and Quebec. We have solved the problem of fisheries with BC that existed since a long time. We have established clearly that where there was duplication in forestry, in mining, in social housing, that was clear. We took one problem at a time. We had a problem with Ontario and BC on immigration that existed since a long time. We cured that. But for me, what is important is to make sure that the country functions well. And it's exactly what I intend to do with improving the situation. We will convince the Quebecers that the best for them is to stay in Canada.
Preston Manning.
Well, for 30 years, the traditional parties have been managing this issue, and in our view, they've bungled it. And now all three of the traditional parties take one approach to this. They say the answer to the unity problem is special status and to recognize Quebec constitutionally as a distinct society. This ignores the rejection of that concept in Meach, its rejection by the public in Charlottetown, and in our view, that is a sure formula for disaster. Now, reform is looking for a fresh start alternative, and this is what we think it is. Adopt the principle of equality of all citizens and provinces, regardless of race, culture, language, or personal characteristics. Offer each of the provinces a bundle of powers to develop the distinctive features of its economy and its society, and have a strong federal government focused in 10 big areas of national and international responsibility. In other words, reform the Federation as an alternative. And the last element in our program would be to make it crystal clear to Quebecers the consequences of either democratically or unilaterally choosing to secede.
Thank you. Gilles Duceppe.
Well, I think the choices are very clear for Quebecers. It is sovereignty or Canada as is. We've been trying for so many years to find an agreement between Quebec and Canada. It was always impossible, always impossible. The only solution is the one we're proposing, having two sovereign countries with a new partnership. A partnership recognizing the equality of both nations, Quebec and Canada. And we don't see any other way of solving that problem. Charlottetown was the very last try we made. And we know, Mr. Chrétien, that the proposal of distinct society you're making, well, Canadians don't want that. You know that as well as me. Even if it means nothing, Mr. Chrétien, it means nothing for Quebecers, but it means too much for Canadians. And you know that better than me, and Mr. Charest know that better than me also.
Mr. Charest.
Well, here's an issue that I also feel very strongly about, to the point where I've always made it very clear to my own party that on this issue, partisan politics will always come in second, that Canada will always come in first. In fact, the real issue for the future is whether or not we as a country are going to work with a separatist agenda or a Canadian agenda. That's the real battle that's out there today. And I want a Canadian agenda. By the way, the good news, let me share the good news with you because I've spent the last 3.5 years traveling. Canadians want this country to work, including a majority of people, of francophones in Quebec, feel attached to their Canadian citizenship and they want this country to work. But what Canada has always required, not just in the last 30 years, but for the last 130 years, is national leaders and national parties able to bring us together, to create a common sense of purpose. I want to do that by changing the way federalism operates and set the table for the more difficult debates that we'll face, like distinct society, like the rebalancing of powers, that will soon come. But let's start first by recreating a common sense of purpose for our country and do away with this politics of divisiveness that we've had for the last 3.5 years.
Thank you, Mr. Charest. Ms. McDonough?
Well, Mr. Oliver, your question was what should the offer to Quebecers be? And I think the offer to Quebecers has to be the offer to other Canadians as well, which is the promise made by the Liberals in the 93 election. That is to make jobs the #1 priority, to strengthen our social programs. These are the things that are going to make Canada strong. These are the things that are going to make Canadians confident. These are the things that are going to make Canada something that everybody wants to be part of. And I believe, having spent a good deal of time in Quebec in the last couple of years, that that's exactly what most Quebecers want. They want to know that they can have jobs, that their kids can have an education, that their relatives can get health care when they're sick. And yes, there are differences about Quebec that need to be respected and recognized. But constitutional reconciliation is not going to be achievable until we improve the political and the economic climate. And then I think people will want to come together in a spirit of generosity to make sure that we can pull together and all move Canada forward as a confident, united country.
Prime Minister, aren't you about ready to give up on this whole concept of distinct society, since it's become a fighting word, particularly in Alberta and BC, where they can veto it? I mean, are you really determined to try to go ahead and entrench this in the Constitution, or how do you intend to sell it?
For me, the word distinct society, the concept, is a question of dignity for the people of Quebec. And I have very much difficulties to understand people using it to try to divide the people. What is distinct society? Distinct society is a recognition that 85% of the people of Quebec speak French. When they speak French, they have a French culture. And we say distinct society comes from the fact that Johnny McDonough in 1867 gave the civil law to Quebecers. These are the three elements of what is distinct society. It is already a recognition of what exists, and it's a question of asking the Canadian to understand that the diversity of Canada, the fact that we have two languages and in Canada, it's not a problem, it's an asset. I'm just asking the people to be generous towards Quebec, and they will be very happy to stay in Canada.
But Mr. Chrétien, we can go ahead. We had this discussion in the House. No one objects if the only object of distinct society is to affirm the distinctiveness of Quebec. But what I asked you in the House was, does this confer on the government of Quebec powers not conferred on other provinces? Because that's the objection in the other provinces. You said, no, it doesn't. So I got up, remember, and moved an amendment to your motion. I moved a motion that said, therefore, nothing in this clause shall confer on the government of Quebec powers, rights, privileges, or status not conferred on the other provinces. And when that came to a vote, Mr. Charest absented himself from the House, and you stood up with the separatists and voted it down. If your position is that this does not confer powers, why in heaven's name didn't you support our motion? It's the only conceivable way I could think of getting that concept through any of the other legislatures.
I'm very happy that you say that you can live with a distinct society concept in Canada if it is not giving some special powers to Quebec. Monsieur Duceppe said a minute ago that it is not giving special powers to the Quebec
But you
government.
would not put that in
But it
writing,
means
nor
nothing
would
for
you put
Quebec.
it in
You know
law.
that,
You
Mr.
would not
President.
put it into law.
The question is a recognition.
No, but
in
why
not
wouldn't
with,
you put it into law? Why wouldn't you put in law what you say your position is? That's what the provinces are asking.
Can we be clear
but
first
we made
on one
progress
element?
because now you're willing to accept it.
Can we be clear on one thing in regards to this debate? It's an issue of identity. It is not about special status. It's not about more privilege. It's not about more money. It never has been. And anyone who says it is deliberately misleading Canadians on this issue. And I regret that. I mean, for example, Ms. McDonough and I may disagree on a lot of things. But on this issue, I was happy to hear her comments because she represents, I think, a proud tradition of national politicians who is dedicated to bringing Canadians together. Those who further try to divide us on this issue, I think, are rendering a great disservice to the country. But what we're talking about here is recognizing the fact that since 1774, way before Sir John A. Macdonald in 1867, we have in this country a French language and culture that is alive and well and dynamic. It is part of our identity whether we speak French or not, and it is for us a great source of pride. It is for Canada a great source of accomplishment. Why can't we say that? Why can't we say, I'm proud of this, and this is something I want to pass on to my children?
Because
That's
we've
what the
been
issue's
trying
about.
for so many years, Mr. Charest. And yourself, you modified the Meach Agreement back in 1990 with Jean Chrétien. And you were on the same
That's a
stages
falsehood.
in 92,
That's a
then in
falsehood.
95, against
No, you
always
know,
against Quebec.
why, Monsieur Duceppe?
There's
Mr.
more than
Duceppe,
2 million
can you
people
know?
that voted for
Mr.
sovereignty
Duceppe,
last time.
you know,
Mr. Chrétien.
you're not interested in any solution because you're a separatist.
Yes, we're proposing a new solution.
No, you want a country that is completely separated from Canada, and in doing that, you always talk about referendum. This is terrible for Quebec. You've lost 2 referendums. You do not accept the will of Quebec, who want to stay in Canada, and you talk referendum and separation, and the money is quitting Quebec. And who is paying the price? It is the workers in Quebec who pay the price.
Mr.
We
Chrétien,
want to
you
find-
made a lot of
and
promises
we're making
back in
progress
1918.
tonight.
Mr. Chrétien, let's come back.
We're making progress
Let's
tonight.
come back.
We're 3 who have an interest to solve the 4. We want to solve the problem.
Mr. Duceppe, you had a
Manning,
point.
Let's
You
come
had a
back
point.
to Craig's initial.
I'm asking you, Mr. Chrétien, will you accept a yes vote in the next referendum, like we're accepting the results of last referendum, because we're still in Canada? If there's a yes vote, will you accept the result?
What would be the question, sir?
The question
Will
is
it be another
agree that
drink,
Quebec becomes a
another
sovereign
lobster
country
trap like the
offering a
one that was described last week in Quebec? Or will it be an honest, clear question?
It was an honest, clear question.
No, because you said to the Quebecers, let's have a partnership. And you said,
That's
we will
the-
negotiate a partnership, when in your mind you wanted just to proclaim independence.
Are you telling me that if the yes had won last referendum, as a Canadian, but as a Quebecer also, you would have refused to negotiate with Quebec, with a mandate in Quebec, negotiate a new partnership? Is that
You
what
didn't
you're
have
telling me?
intention of negotiating anything. Mr. Parizeau, and even in Rimouski, 5 days before the referendum, Mr. Bouchard said that he had, like Parizeau, the intention of moving first
Mr.
with
Chrétien,
sovereignty.
can we
But
come
let's
back?
talk about
Can we
solving
come
the
back?
problem.
Can we
We'll
come
be
back?
more
Let's
on
talk
your
about the problem. Can we come back to
clear.
the initial question? And this is the wrangling we hear among Quebec politicians every day of our lives in the House. But let's come back to the
Nobody's
original
become
question.
more embroiled in this
In the
than
referendum.
Preston Manning.
Use it in BC,
Nobody's
in Alberta.
become
In the
more
referendum.
embroiled in the
Mr. Chairman.
constitutional wrangling
In the
than Preston
referendum,
Manning.
you told Canadians not to worry. I went to see you 16 months before that referendum. I was worried sick. I thought the way you fight a dream is with another dream, not with administrative tinkering. And you told me, as you told the public, I give you credit, you said the same in private as you did public. There was nothing to worry about. All we had to do was manage the Federation a little better and communicate a little better, and things would work out fine. And you almost blew it, sir. Now the question is, if you do that again, you will really blow it, and you do not deserve a second chance unless you have a fresh vision.
But Mr.
of
Manning, if
federalism
you
to
want
offer.
to help, you just said that you had no problem with distinct society if it is mean what I said it means.
But listen to me. No, listen to exactly what I said.
A very nice
no,
gesture.
our solution. Would you once listen to an alternative solution? Why not base the future on equality of citizens and provinces? That is saleable in every province in this country. Why not offer to each province a bundle of rights, resources, social services, and jurisdiction over language and culture? Give it to them all so they're treated equally, but allow them to use it to develop distinctive features.
Mr. Manning,
and thirdly, let me finish just once. And thirdly, why don't you focus the federal government on 10 big areas of national and international importance? That formula can be sold in every part of the country, but it's an alternative to special status.
The problem, Mr. Manning, is for you there is no difference in our society. There is not one province that's exactly the same. We voted in the House of Commons not long ago
to change listening to what I say.
To change the Constitution of Newfoundland, because in Newfoundland they have a system of education that is different than Alberta and BC.
Mr. Chrétien, you're not listening, and it's just not listening that could cost the country. When I say give each province a bundle of rights, and then allow them to develop the distinctive features of their economy and their society, I am talking about a greater approach to recognizing distinctiveness than anything that has ever occurred to you. What's wrong with that?
If I may, on this issue of recognizing the equality of the province, on April 16th, 1981, the government of Quebec, in a formal document with other provinces, was ready to recognize the equality of the provinces. But frankly, the problem I have with you, Mr. Manning, on this issue in particular, is that all I hear in regards to Canada coming from you is always negative. I never get a sense that there's something positive that we have built together. I don't get a sense that you see a role for the national government. It's all massive devolution now, which is as wrong as massive centralization was. I happen to think that there is a role for the national government, that there is something constructive about Canada, that if we're going to succeed, we're going to have to stop and make sure that Canadians have a good sense of what they have accomplished together, and then move forward. This idea of a covenant in healthcare, trade, and education, I think, is going to go a long way in re-establishing our sense of confidence, demonstrating that the Federation can operate differently, make a commitment to the basic values we have, and then set the table for the more difficult debate on how we have to bring about some change. But don't be mistaken, even though Mr. Duceppe tonight doesn't like the word distinct society, is anyone mistaken that he's actually ever supported it, or that he ever will in the future? His goal is quite clear. It's to separate the country. We know that. Let's reach out to the majority of people in Quebec, and I'm sorry to inform you of this, Mr. Duceppe, including the majority of people who speak French, who want this country to work and succeed. And the biggest challenge I've set for myself is to connect them with other Canadians so that they can go forward together. And I have news for you. I intend to make this country work, because if there's one commitment I've made to my children, is that I'm going to pass on to them the country I've received from my parents. I'm determined to make that happen.
You're coming back with a Charlottetown agreement.
In all due respect.
And I would like to say at this moment...
I'm sorry, but I'm sorry to say, but the agreed upon time limit has run out, and my apologies. So we will now turn to the audience questions. Jacques?
Yes, I have with me Robert Scroso. He lives in Montreal, and he has a question for Mr. Manning.
Mr. Manning, you spoke of equality for all Canadians, but how does your plan address the Native concerns in Canada?
Well, we propose to, and I thank you for that question, for raising it in the context of national unity, because the equality principle would apply there, or the special status approach. We propose to do away with the Federal Department of Indian Affairs. We think that the vast amount of money poured in the top never gets to ordinary Aboriginal people. We propose to support local Aboriginal government, but our concept of local Aboriginal government is more along the line of municipal government for Aboriginal people on reserve, like the local government powers given to other Canadians. And that's how we propose to treat all people equally, give people, Aboriginals on reserve, the same tools that you give to other Canadians, and only this form of municipal government would essentially be federally chartered. And our view is, if you could give Aboriginal people the tools that other Canadians have in the form of local government, and in the sense of some of the private enterprise tools, that this is the key to the development of our Aboriginal people in a way and at a level that they've not experienced heretofore.
Thank you. Donna?
This is Richard Muse from Wolfville, Nova Scotia. He has a question for Mr. Duceppe.
Good evening. I'm from Nova Scotia, and I can tell you that the people of Atlantic provinces have extreme concerns over a separatist Quebec. How would you address your fellow Canadians in those provinces if Quebec does separate? What role do they play in Canada?
Well, what we're basically saying is that Quebecers are a nation, just like Canadians are a nation, just like the Americans are a nation. And having a sovereign Quebec, two nations with two countries, and developing a new partnership with Canada instead of discussing all those agreements we've tried to reach and we have always failed since the last 30 years. Instead of putting all our energy on those discussions, we should accept that Quebec is different, that we facing two nations, two different countries, and with a new partnership. I mean, that's exactly what they did in Europe, having sovereign countries collaborating freely in larger economic organizations. That's what we're proposing. That's the way of the future.
Thank you. Jacques.
I have with me here Patrick Garbut. He lives here in Ottawa. He has a question for Mr. Chrétien.
Mr. Chrétien, I think most people are really tired of the unity issue. It's a fact. Are we ever going to be able to meet the demands of the separatists without separating our country? Will it continue like a spoiled child? The more they get, the more they're going to want.
For me, sir, I think that I can understand your frustration. But it's been a struggle to keep this country together since 1867. And there will always be people who will want to propose separation. That's part of a democratic society. But I do believe that if we all work together and we do not use a partisanship approach to try to score political points, and if we make sure that we have the same speech in Quebec than we have in Alberta and elsewhere, that will be very useful. And if everybody wants to really keep the country together, we have to recognize to be generous, because when you're in a minority, you always feel insecure. I am one of the Quebecers francophone. And the insecurity living in North America with virtually 300 million people speaking English create a lot of insecurity. And if we gave them the guarantee that they will be respected in their dignity of being francophone, they will want to stay in Canada. And it's why my approach had been to solve one problem at a time, to make sure that Canada functioned well. In the last referendum, they were arguing that they were living in a bankrupt nation, that they should not stay in Canada because of that. Now Canada is doing very well compared to others, and the people, if we show the generosity that we, the Federalists, like Mr. Charest, myself, and Madame McDonough, are showing here tonight, they will want to stay in Canada because they realize that they are welcome in Canada and that their future is really in this great country that we all love.
I believe I'm getting some words in my ear. And perhaps we ended the debate a little bit prematurely. And so, Mr. Duceppe, we do apologize that the timing seemed to have been mistaken, and perhaps you would like to respond to some of the earlier comments.
Well, we said it again and again. We've been trying to reach an agreement with Canada. And I think that Meach and Charlottetown were the very last steps. And it's very clear that we can't reform that country. And the way we see countries in Europe, and even in North America with NAFTA, having different nations having their own countries, and those countries collaborating in larger economic organizations. That's exactly what we're proposing. I don't see why Canadians should be against such a proposal instead of discussing again and again and again like we did since the last 35 years. And what you promised back in 1980, when you made that Constitution of 1982, you know that no government of Quebec never recognized that Constitution, being a federalist government or a sovereigntist government. So you know that pretty well, Mr. Chrétien. You know there's no solution to that problem. You know there's more than 2 million people in Quebec supporting sovereignty. And you know one day, and sooner than we think, we'll have our country. You know that pretty well.
Thank you, Mr. Duceppe. And we now come to our fifth and our final theme for this evening, which is how well Parliament serves Canadians. And Jason, I believe you have a question for Gilles Duceppe.
Mr. Duceppe, you would know as well as anyone in the country how regionally based the last Parliament was. Everybody knows that the Bloc Québécois, the official opposition, had representatives from Quebec only, and with the exception of one MP from Ontario, how the Reform Party had representatives from Western Canada only. The question is the following: how well or how poorly do you think Canadians have been served by this regional-based opposition?
Well, I don't consider the Bloc as a regional party. I consider it as a national party, because Quebec is a nation. It's also, I think, was a good thing for Canadian democracy that for the first time in history, the main actors is debating the most important political question, which is the relations between Canada and Quebec, were in the House of Commons. That was the first time that Canadians heard sovereigntists discussing and debating with Federalists in the House of Commons. Before, it was only Federalists there telling that Quebecers were not serious, sovereigntists were not serious. For the first time, I think Quebec sent a very clear message to the rest of Canada. And it was not the first time that we were facing an official opposition with people only from a region. We had the Tories before, with only one member in Quebec. So we lived through that. So I think that the Bloc expressed the reality that Canadians didn't know before.
Jean Charest.
Well, I do happen to think that, in fact, I do know that Canadians felt that something was very wrong in the last Parliament of Canada. Here we had two regional parties whose view of the country stopped at the Ottawa River. And frankly, I don't think they care very much about what was beyond that river. And that led to a situation where we had a national government that was held that wasn't accountable, that could do whatever they want. Mr. Chrétien, for all intents and purposes, was skating alone on the ice, shooting pucks in an empty net. Evidence of that is in this election campaign, where only a few days into it, all of a sudden he discovers health care. And then they started the election campaign saying there was no money at all. Then they found money, billions of dollars, on the Tuesday. And of course, being the Liberal government, they spent it all on Wednesday. And so here we have typically an election campaign that is forcing him to be accountable. But what is the most disturbing about all of this is the lack of leadership in regards to how we bring Canadians together. But it's no wonder that they've been able to slash health care. Mr. Manning's been more busy putting out fires in his own caucus than fighting the health care cuts. Mr. Duceppe's been more obsessed with separation. We want to see more balance and a national alternative. That's what I've been preparing for the last 3 years.
Thank you, Mr. Charest. Alexa McDonough.
I think it's evident that this Parliament has been a disaster for Canadians. I mean, we've had a federal Liberal government that's been sitting on its big, fat majority for 3.5 years, accountable to nobody, a government that was elected to be everything that the Brian Mulroney government wasn't, and has picked up the Tory torch and been running it with it ever since, in fact, torching the things that matter most to Canadians, which is having jobs, health care, education for their kids, and a reasonable, fair tax system. Why? Why have they been getting away with it? Because we have one political party that doesn't want Canada to work for Canadians, and another opposition party that doesn't want government to work for Canadians. And both of these gentlemen are busy trying to convince Canadians that we should tear Canada apart and we should tear government down. We've made government work much better for Canadians in the past. And with the presence of New Democrats, we've always been able to make a difference. That's how we got Medicare. That's how we got public pensions. That's how we've gotten a lot of the things that Canadians value most.
Preston Manning.
I have several suggestions on how to make Parliament work better, but I'd like to analyze the composition of the Canadian Parliament a little bit differently than you did, Jason. If you look at our Parliament, you really see three constitutional or unity options. You see the status quo federalists who say the federation is basically okay the way it is. You've got to tinker with it a little bit, but it'll survive. They're the ones that have brought us to the brink of the national unity disaster. You see the separatists who want to break up the federation. And there's a third group, and that is Reform, that wants to reform the Federation as the best way to keep it together. In the last election, the West expressed its discontent with the Federation by sending reformers. Quebec expressed its discontent by sending separatists. And in this election, what is absolutely crucial is what Ontario and Atlantic Canada do. If Ontario and Atlantic Canada endorse the status quo, that could sends the wrong signal both east and west. But if Ontario and Atlantic Canada were come down hard on reform the Federation, that could be the thing that unifies our country.
Jean Chrétien.
But for me, what is very important in politics is to be able to have a programs that you can talk about in every part of Canada, not to be afraid to say what you think in Alberta. I was in Calgary. I was not afraid to talk about distinct society. And in Quebec, I talk about the same thing. It's why we have managed to have members elected in every part of Canada, because our main preoccupation is to have policies that is known by everybody and respect diversity in unity. This has been the history of our party. And we believe that the government can play a force for good in society, that we can use the government, but the government should not be in everything. So having an agenda that is acceptable to the country is what is needed for Parliament to work well. But unfortunately, the parties have taken views that are too extreme and not acceptable for all parts of Canada. It's why only the Liberal Party got the benefit of the situation.
Jason?
Mr. Duceppe, the backdrop of the 1993 election was all the anger and hostility that Canadians had for politicians and the political process. A lot of the anger has subsided, but instead of open hostility, there's a lot of indifference now. Polls tell us that people aren't that interested in this campaign. There's a great deal of indifference. Why do you think politicians have not succeeded in restoring confidence in Canadians with the political system?
Well, when we look at the federal government, the Liberal government, we had promising to abolish the GST, promising to settle the problems with Quebec. Nothing of that was done. But more largely, I would say that we have to discuss and debate with people and represent them in the House of Commons as well as in any parliament. And that's why the Bloc is there. It's not only to be in power. Democracy is about representing the people who elected us in each riding. And that's what we're doing with the Bloc Québécois, discussing with people, representing them. And most of the time, when you look at the vote taken at the House of Commons, the NDP supported the Bloc Québécois. Most of the time when we were defending the unemployed, when we were denouncing the family trustees. So that's the kind of job we have to do to get the respect of the people.
This also points to the longer-term problem, though, on this issue. And Mr. Duceppe said it very well. In the longer term, there are Bloc members who got themselves elected in the province of Quebec. The real issue is if we're going to deal with this problem, whether or not we're going to reach out to national political parties and national leaders who are relevant to every part of the country. I also traveled to Calgary, and then the next night traveled to Chicoutimi and traveled to every part of this country. One of the very important commitments to make this country function, because we are blessed with all this geography but have a small population base and a great deal of diversity, is to make a very strong commitment to national parties that are going to connect Canadians among them. But in the end, make no mistake about it, my objective is clear. If there's a political party that can defeat the Bloc where they are in the province of Quebec, we're going to do that job. And that's where we'll start by reuniting Canadians, by focusing what they have in common, by having them recognize that in Quebec a majority of people, and again a majority of Francophones, I'm sorry to say to Mr. Duceppe, badly want this country to work. Well, I have news for him. I intend to connect them to Canadians in Calgary, Canadians in Come By Chance in Newfoundland or wherever they live, and I intend to make this country work.
Are you telling me that the people in Quebec are supporting the Plan B? Because you're supporting the Plan B just as Jean Chrétien and just as Preston Manning. That's what you said very clearly. Are you telling me that people are
Canadians,
supporting
Canadians,
Plan
what I know, Mr. Duceppe, is that a majority of people, a vast majority, not just a vast majority of people in Quebec want the Canadian Federation to work. Your own policy advisor, Mr. Turp, recognized that a few months ago and embarrassed your party. I think you would probably, if you're honest tonight, recognize the same thing. Well, what they need, though, is an opportunity, and they need the leadership able to connect them to other Canadians.
This issue is not going to be resolved by wrangling around, by Quebec politicians. It's going to have to be resolved by others. But I think the issue that's always being avoided here, it's a question of trust in the Parliament. And the only way you're going to restore trust in the Parliament is for politicians to show their trust in the people. And I come back to this issue I tried to raise earlier of accountability. I think until there's greater accountability, I mean, Mr. Chrétien, you broke the 3 biggest promises in your Red Book. People refer to your Red Book like they do the Bre-X prospectus, so don't go near a helicopter. That the only way to get accountability that I can think of is to put in the hands of the voters the tools to hold us accountable, and the best one is recall. It's the power to fire an elected official who breaks his word or breaks his promises. Now, are you or are you not prepared to support that step to restore accountability to the Parliament of Canada?
No, I don't believe, as I said, in by-elections every month. It's not the way that the system works. We have a plan. We have a plan. We go to the people. We explain our plan.
But they can't.
We say what we want to do. When you're the government, you do your best. You're not sure that you will achieve everything, but I'm very proud of what we have achieved. In some areas, I'm sorry, we have not been able to do what we wanted to do. We wanted to harmonize the sales tax with all the province. Unfortunately, and I'm sorry, we were not able to do that. But you look at the totality of what we've done.
We're not talking about falling short.
We did better than expected and we promised on the deficit. I never mentioned in my program last time that one of the great success of the last 4 years had been Team Canada. When we went abroad with all the premiers and 450 people going abroad, selling goods and services that the Canadians were able to sell in a global market.
We're not talking, Mr.
And
Chrétien,
you look at the totality
Chrétien,
of what we've done, and people pass judgment.
We're not talking about you falling short on certain policy objectives. We're talking about when you make an explicit promise and break it, the people have no way of yanking your chain in between elections. Now, do you believe that people should be given a chain that they could yank so that when you say, I'll kill the GST, and you don't, there's something they can do between elections?
I just said to you that we do not succeed in GST to do what we wanted to do. We talk in the Red Book about harmonization with the provincial government. We have done it with 4 provinces, and we have not been able to do it with all the provinces. So I'm sorry,
here we are
but look at the totality.
Here we are back to the Red Book. You broke your promise on the GST, you broke it on jobs, you broke it on NAFTA, you broke it on childcare, you broke it on the CBC, you broke your guarantee on education and health. Those are the promises you broke, Mr. Chrétien. And saying to Canadians that you're sorry they misunderstood you isn't going to wash. Or quoting them the fine print from the Red Book is only going to remind them that the Red Book ended up being Red Face Book 2 when it was put out during this election campaign.
How do people hold you accountable for keeping your promises between elections?
I think accountability has something to do also, Mr. Manning, with leadership. And I think a lot of Canadians were troubled with the fact that in regards to your own party on leadership, that when you were faced with a situation of intolerance, that you ended up throwing out the mainstream members of your own party and keeping on side or giving a 2-minute penalty to the extremists in your own party.
You're avoiding the question of how
that's an issue of accountability.
Can I ask you a question on this same issue of accountability? You're very big on accountability of the government, and you should be. And that's what an effective opposition is about. Where does your accountability come in? When you supported the GST and you supported the harmonization of the GST, no wonder you couldn't stand up to this government and hold them accountable for breaking the commitment. You said when you got into that Parliament, governments can't do anything about jobs, and you did nothing about jobs until the last few months leading into this election. You did not perform your role as an effective opposition when this government was cutting health care and cutting education and cutting the CBC and cutting its commitment to child care. Why? Because as the opposition, you weren't doing anything to stand up to them on any of those things. You were saying cut further, cut faster, cut deeper, cut into the bone marrow.
You asked me a question.
Is there any accountability for opposition parties?
Okay, Ms. McDonough, you asked me a question and give me an opportunity to answer it. On accountability, the old CCF, which gave birth to your party, used to believe in this concept of recall and referendum and free votes. It's where the Democratic came in the New Democratic Party. Are you prepared to be held accountable in that way, to support a recall provision so that you could be held accountable for the
Mr.
promises
Manning,
you make in this campaign?
would have been delighted and will be delighted after June the 2nd to be in the House of Commons being an effective opposition, not talking out of both sides of my mouth for 3 years and suddenly on the eve of the election discovering jobs, health care, education and child poverty as issues that you should be
Mr. Manning, you yourself, you were always talking, lecturing on us on free votes.
We had
and
more
there was
free
not,
votes.
you know, we had much more free vote on our side.
No, that's not
because
correct,
you could
Prime
not
Minister.
control.
That's
you could
not
not control
correct.
your troops.
Prime
the
Minister,
problem is, and I don't blame you, you have to be a leader and make decisions according to the reality of the day. In politics, I've been in politics a long time. And you know a lot about politics because your father was there. And sometimes it's difficult to govern. There is no easy solution. You know, a lot of people promise easy solution. It's the toughest jobs in the land. But look at the result. Look at the result. The IMF said that Canada will have the best performance of all the industrialized world in 1997 and 1998. The same Canada that was considered as a basket case in 1993.
You can go one of the worst records on child poverty among all industrialized
nations. And we ranked 14 in the OECD as on unemployment rates concerned. So
you can go all around.
I may have found the answer on accountability that you were looking for. It'll happen on the 2nd of June, 1997. It will happen for Mr. Chrétien and Mr. Manning, for everyone. And I think that on that day, Canadians are going to want to look to the future. They're not going to want to look to the past. And they're going to also want to look in the end to national leaders and parties that are able to reach out to every part of Canada.
Madam Chairman,
that will be the ultimate accountability for each and every one of us.
What has happened here is that all the leaders have gone all around the mulberry bush, but they have rejected the three basic tools to establish greater accountability in the Parliament. One is free votes, the other is referendum, and the other is a recall mechanism.
On that note, I'm going to again say time is out. We are running out of the big time towards 11, so that is our final round, and I thank you all. And now we go to our last group of questions. Jacques.
Yes, I'm here with Patricia Fry. She lives in Dunsford, Ontario, and she has a question for Mr. Manning.
Mr. Manning, it seems to me that the problems of Aboriginal peoples, which you earlier mentioned, have historically been rooted in brilliant parliamentary solutions of politicians such as yourself, imposing assimilationist policies and trying to make these peoples the same as all other Canadians. I would like to know how many Aboriginal peoples you have consulted about your brilliant municipal government scheme.
Well, we've consulted quite a few. Before I ever got into politics, I spent 20 years in management consulting in Alberta. One of my areas of work was working with trying to improve relations between Aboriginals and energy companies. So a lot of my experience in this area came before I ever got into the Parliament. The problems that you refer to in how the federal government has dealt with Aboriginal people, and I consider it one of the scandals, both a social and economic scandal in the magnitude of a tragedy, all occurred under Liberal or Tory administrations. What we're saying is the way that is to help Aboriginal people not be assimilated to any degree that they do not want to be, is to give them the powers, local government level, to develop the distinctive features of their own economies and their societies. That's the purpose behind our decentralization approach with respect to Aboriginal people.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Donna.
This is Carolyn Ward from Montreal. She has a question for Mr. Charest.
Hello, Mr. Charest. My question is on the subject of how Parliament is serving Canadians, how you feel about the option of partition as a means of representation.
Thank you, Carolyn. And you being from Montreal, you'd obviously be very concerned about all of this debate and what impact it would have on your life. I guess the most honest answer that anyone could offer you in regards to what would happen on partition is that if ever we as a country cross that line where there's a yes vote, we're all walking in to a black hole. There are no rules. History has taught us that. Everything that we know about conflicts around the world equally also teaches us that. A few events in the last few days have reminded us of that, but let me just return to what it is exactly we are facing. A, there are no legal provisions in our Constitution to separate the country. There are no countries, I think the old Soviet Union may have had dispositions to do that, but that was about it. There's no country in the world that contemplates its own disappearance, so it's illegal to separate. We know that. In international law, there are no rules either. I mean, try to, refer to one instance where international law was able to impose its will on a group of people if they didn't want that to happen. So the most honest, and I'm maybe very sobering also, but most honest answer is to say that this is a black hole and that there be no rules.
Thank you very much.
That being sobering, if I can just add this, doesn't it make it even more compelling to make the country work? Thank you.
Jacques?
I'm with Philip Thomas. He lives in St. Catharines, Ontario. He has a question for Mr. Chrétien.
We've heard a lot of talk about voter apathy in the early part of this campaign. Canadians have seen a lot of broken promises. We're pretty cynical towards politicians. All of the politicians, all of the parties put together policy platforms and booklets and CD-ROMs, but for the most part, Canadians don't pay any attention to those things because they really don't believe what's said in them. My question is, how much responsibility do you take for the high level of voter apathy, and what are you doing to improve the situation?
But for me, I know that the people are very often very unhappy or don't like very much the government. But there is one thing I'd like to say to you, that we are elected to serve. I've spent my life in public life, and I know that all my colleagues do their best. We disagree, but we are there to serve. And it's very difficult. And it's why it's very difficult to to be reasonable, to be middle of the ground, not to have the easiness of doctrinaire approach. But for me, I believe that politicians serve well, and we're very lucky in Canada. We have a level of public service that is probably one of the best in the world, and it's the same thing with the level of public service in Canada. And what is good is we know that the people are watching us, and they have the right to vote for us, and we have to gain their confidence. For me, it's going to be my 11th election. I've been elected 9 times in Quebec and 1 time in New Brunswick. And every time I felt that it was a great honor that the people in this riding gave me their confidence and voting for me, and I've always done my best. I've not been perfect. I don't claim I'm perfect, but I've had a lot of experience, and I tried to find a reasonable solution in situations that are very difficult. And it is the way that I believe people can still vote for politicians who are committed, like I think I have been over the last 30 years.
Thank you. Donna, do you have a question?
Yes, this is Hugh LaRue from Gloucester, Ontario. He has a question for Mr. Duceppe.
Good evening. I'd like to know how you can compare yourself to the Tory opposition a few years back when they had representatives, at least in Quebec, in the ridings, when you didn't have any outside of Quebec, the last election.
Yes, they had one member from Quebec out of 75 ridings. There were 74 Liberals and only 1 Tory. But the question is more important than that. I think in democracy, we have the right to be represented by the people we choose. And the Quebecers are paying taxes in Canada. They have the right to be represented in the House of Commons. And they voted, and they will vote for the Bloc Québécois again, because they feel we're representing their interests. And as long as we're paying taxes, we'll be there. That's an old lesson from the American Revolution. No taxation without representation. So we are there, and I think it's also good for Canadian democracy, since the main actors concerning the most important political debate in Canada are there to debate that question of the relations between Quebec and Canada.
Thank you very much. We have time if we have one very, very quick last question.
I've been promised it will be. It's
very, very quick.
I'm with Lindsay Patrick. She lives in Ottawa, and she has a question for Mr. Charest.
Yes. In your platform, you talk about cutting the budget, reducing taxes. But what federal functions are you going to cut to be able to balance the books?
Well, we're going to look at federal program spending. Among the things we want to do is merge departments of natural resources, fisheries, agriculture, and environment into one single department of sustainable development. One of the things we want to do is privatize the Department of Public Works, because we think there are a lot of things that the private sector can do better. The main functions of Public Works would go over to Treasury Board. There are cost savings that we're proposing also in the way that government operates. We've detailed it all in this plan, Let the Future Begin. We're the only party, by the way, that has included the numbers on both spending cuts and cost savings. They've been verified. There's a technical note. There's a technical note at the end of this also. Is it your turn, Ms. Medina? Well, I have my own thank you.
Thank you for your very brief answer, Mr. Charest. Because it's now time to turn to the closing remarks. Again, there has been a draw to determine the order. And Jean Charest, back to you.
Again. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you about the future of our country tonight. At the beginning of my remarks, you may remember that I said that leadership matters. And it matters very much for this country. It can make a real difference. I've hoped that you've had a chance to learn more about the kind of person that I am, but also the kind of leadership that I want to offer Canada. You deserve leadership that has the courage to attempt what may seem to others as being impossible. You also deserve leadership that will also bring to this job a real determination to never give up, whether it's the unemployed or health care or those who are poor. We need leadership that will always be determined to keep our country together and keep it moving. And you also deserve leadership with new ideas that will really make a difference. My challenge in the election campaign now is to go out there and reach out to as many Canadians as possible and to offer them an opportunity to look at my plan, to compare. And I invite that comparison, to compare the leaders, compare the plans, the ideas, our perspective for the future. I believe we offer the choices which can best offer our country a move forward together. And I also need your help. I need your help to build a new Canadian coalition so that Canadians can move forward together into this next century. What I want to do is three things. I want to bring taxes down so that hard work can be rewarded and more work created. I want to build up the health care system so that it will be there when you need it. And I want to draw on the wills of Canadians to stay united and strong so that we can also move forward together. Thank you tonight for listening, for being with us, and I look forward to your confidence on the 2nd of June.
Preston Manning.
At the beginning of this debate, I challenge you to consider whether you want more of the same or whether we want a fresh start. And based on what you've heard, do you want a country in which big government is at the centre of things, more of the same, or do you want a fresh start for Canada which puts you and your family at the centre of things? Do you want a country in which Canadians are extended special status with all the wrangling about what that means and definition? Or do you want Reform's fresh start for Canada where the unifying principle of our great country is equality of citizens and provinces? Even if you like what you hear, you may ask, how can I trust anyone? You have little faith in promises of politicians because of the track record on broken promises. Well, you can choose more of the same, more broken promises, politicians who ignore you between elections, or you can choose a fresh start, a commitment from us that is not guaranteed by promises, but is a real democratic guarantee. Reform's Fresh Start guarantee will give you the power of recall, the right to fire an elected official who loses your trust. It will include a commitment to free vote so that your MP works for you rather than the party whip or the Prime Minister or the party leader. And it includes the right to use referendum and citizens' initiatives mechanisms to direct the Parliament when it fails to respect your wishes. The Reform Party believes that this is a fresh approach that Canadians are looking for in the 1997 federal election. You have told us the kind of country that you want for yourselves and your children. We invite you to use the Reform Party of Canada as a vehicle to reach that new Canada. Thank you.
Gilles Duceppe.
This evening we have discussed many of the issues facing Quebec and Canada, both social and economic. Over the last 3 years, the Bloc Québécois has taken clear stands on all of these issues. In fact, the voice of the Bloc has been heard and has made a difference, especially for those too often without a voice, workers, the poor, and the unemployed. And the Bloc Québécois intends to continue its work by pushing for jobs and long overdue fiscal reform. But tonight, we have also dealt with important political issues. For almost half of this century, Quebecers have been claiming more powers for the government in Quebec City, and clearly this is not likely to change. Half a century of constitutional discussions on the divisions of powers culminated in the failures of Meach and Charlottetown. Quebecers are tired, as Canadians, of going around and around the same issues. At the eve of the 21st century, this merry-go-round must stop. We must all face the fact that the only feasible solution is the sovereignty of Quebec and a new partnership with Canada, a partnership as desirable as it is inevitable for the two peoples who have links as strong as ours. May our common values of tolerance and understanding allow us to face serenely these changes which we believe to be essential for the future well-being of our two people. Thank you.
Jean Chrétien.
Canadians are reasonable people. You do not expect your government to perform miracles, but you have every right to expect it to work hard, to plan for the future, to be responsible, to be honest. And that means being straight with people about the facts, about options and consequences. That is why I refuse to try to buy your votes with a premature tax cut or with reckless spending that will take away all the gains we have made together since 1993. That is why I will not gamble with our very future as a country with divisive rhetoric. We have always progressed as a country by taking a reasonable, responsible course, by working together to find common ground. I pledge to continue the job we started in 1993. We are on the right track and will stay on track. To balance our budget once for all, to work on job creation, to invest in health care, in children, in education, learning and innovation. Serving as your Prime Minister is a great honour and a great responsibility. A Canadian Prime Minister must serve all the citizens in all regions of our country fairly and equally. I love Canada. I have great faith in its people and great confidence in its future, and it's why I ask for your support on June the 2nd. Thank you very much, and good night.
And last, Alexa McDonough.
I want to leave you with some final thoughts on Canada's future. When you voted in the last election, you didn't vote for $7 billion of cuts in health and education, but that's what you got. You didn't vote in the last election to keep 1.5 million Canadians out of work, but that's what you got. You didn't vote in the last election for Liberals to implement conservative and reform policies, but that's what you got. How did it happen? Because Parliament was lopsided. There is a solution. When this campaign began, the New Democratic Party became equal participants in the political process for the first time since 1993. And since that time, we've had more discussion, more attention, more debate on the critical issues of jobs, health care, education, poverty, and fair taxes in 3.5 weeks than we've seen in Parliament in 3.5 years. We put those priorities on the agenda, and after the next election, we want to make sure those issues are front and centre in the next Parliament. Vote NDP this time, and that's what you'll get. We can do better in Canada. Help us fight for that. Together we can build the Canada that we all want, a country of opportunity and hope, a country in which everyone has a chance to succeed and nobody is left behind. Thank you and good night.
Thank you, and thank you all, and that concludes tonight's debate. Its purpose was really quite straightforward, to give the voters a chance to find out just a little bit more about the important choice that they'll be making on June 2nd. I thank you, the leaders. I thank you, the journalists. I thank our special audience. And I thank you for being with us tonight. Good night.